Hello my friends, welcome back to Garhdo Goes Geek. On today's episode, we are going to be discussing Star Wars The Clone Wars, an amazing series in and of itself, but I'm specifically going to be looking at how I feel that The Clone Wars makes Revenge of the Sith, Star Wars Episode 3, the best Star Wars movie. Once again, I want to make another little quick apology. Hopefully this will be the last episode I do this with. But yes, obviously, as you may guess, this episode was meant to be out a lot earlier. Star Wars Day is usually celebrated in May, and this May was also not only, May the 4th, which is the generally accepted Star Wars Day, but also the 45th anniversary of Star Wars A New Hope, and the 20th anniversary of Star Wars Attack of the Clones. Now, I originally wanted to look at a lot more Star Wars stuff, but then got overwhelmed while rewatching the Clone Wars and, decided to make that the focus of the episode. And I had to catch up a lot on the Clone Wars. There's a lot of this that I hadn't seen before. I kind of caught... I was overall familiar with what happened in certain seasons, but there was a lot of filler episodes that I hadn't seen, and a lot of somewhat major episodes that I hadn't seen, especially in the later seasons. And so I wanted to sort of look at them again with fresh eyes and with a much more critical eye. And that's when I eventually came up with the topic of this episode, which is how I feel that they make Episode 3 the best Star Wars film. Because Episode 3 has always been my favourite Star Wars film. It's kind of a misnomer. Do I think it's technically the best? No, it's not technically the best, but it's by far and away my favourite Star Wars film. And I'm going to explain why, and why I feel the Clone Wars makes it so good. So, please enjoy. First thing I want to make very, very clear is that while I am a Star Wars fan, I am not a huge Star Wars fan. I wouldn't consider myself well versed in the entirety of Star Wars lore, but I am still a fan of Star Wars. And Star Wars fandom has taken on a very particular meaning in recent years, and Star Wars fandom, I find as well, quite toxic a lot of the time. I came to Star Wars quite late in my life. I was very much a fan of things like Star Trek when I was a child. But something like Star Wars I didn't come to until relatively late in my childhood. I think I was nearly approaching my teenage years, actually, when I first got into Star Wars. 1997, when the special editions of the original trilogy came out, I was aware of them, but I didn't watch them. I didn't go to the cinema to go and watch the re-releases of the special editions. I had never seen the original trilogy at that point. I had no real interest in it. I remember there was a tie-in range of Tazos, was what they were called. So they were bizarre little things. They were like things you collect in crisp packets and trade on the playground. I don't know if any of my American listeners had anything like that. But we had Pogs and we had Tazos. And Pogs were like their own thing, and you had like a slammer, and you try and collect as many as you could and compete with them. Tazos were more kind of a collectible thing. And there was a Looney Tunes range, which was quite popular. But then when the special editions of Star Wars came out, they did a line of Tazos that you could get a nice collectible folder for and put all the Tazos that you collected, which had like scenes from the movies, and you would build the scenes up. And I remember looking at that because my friend had that little collection book, and he was working really hard to try and complete the collection. And I remember looking at that, and I was thinking, okay, this is kind of cool. This is better than what I'd thought it was, but at the same time, I really wasn't too fussed. I was like, I'll probably watch them eventually, but I think I did try watching the first Star Wars and was quite bored by it. I didn't think much of it at all. The first Star Wars film I remember watching was Star Wars Episode 1. I watched that in the cinema, and I remember being really excited by the trailers. The trailers were building this as this big event, and it was really good. In the trailers, at least, it looked like this big, amazing thing. And I went to watch it. I was 13 when I saw Episode 1 in cinemas. And me and a friend went, and we both really enjoyed it. He was a bit more of a Star Wars fan than I was, but we both quite enjoyed it. It was a lot in there that we liked. And looking back at it as an adult, a lot of it I don't like as much. I think things like a lot of Jar Jar Binks' jokes, which obviously I laughed at when I was a lot younger, they're not very funny anymore. You know, a lot of the action scenes that just seem to happen from nowhere, like the fish in the undersea segment. It's like, yeah, okay, they're entertaining enough, but I find a lot more interest now in the political side of everything. The political storyline with Palpatine when Padme gets to Coruscant and manipulates her into deposing the Chancellor. I find that a lot more interesting as an adult watching Episode 1. But or, you know, the politics between the Jedi Council. But Episode 1 I'm not a huge fan of. I think the pod race is great, the lightsaber fight at the end is great, but a lot of it is very forgettable. But it was off the back of Episode 1 that I finally watched the original trilogy, and I remember quite liking them. It was the special editions I watched first. Obviously, they were the ones that were doing the rounds. They ended up on television off the back of Episode 1 coming out. And yeah, I quite liked them. Empire was obviously my favourite, although I quite liked Return of the Jedi. I say quite like. I've gone very back and forth on Return of the Jedi. The first half of the film in Jabba's palace is a bit tedious in places, but at the same time is interesting. I think it takes up too much of the total runtime. The final battle on Endor, the fact that it's another Death Star really annoys me. Like, it's just another Death Star, and yeah, that I don't like that as much. But the emotion in the final fight between Luke and Vader, I'm totally on board with that. I really enjoy that. So having that as part of the storyline, yeah, I like that. I've got time for that. So in some respects, while I think Return of the Jedi is a very, very good emotional conclusion for a lot of this story in the original trilogy, in terms of the thematics, I also am not as sold on it as a narrative conclusion, because I feel it treads a lot of the same ground that the previous two films already did, and did better. But yeah, there's elements of it I still really enjoy to this day. Episode 2, I remember watching in the cinema, and I remember by that point I was already a fan of the original trilogy, and the conclusion of Episode 2, the start of the Clone Wars, I was very, very intrigued as to how we get from the end of Episode 2 to where we find ourselves in A New Hope. Because the clones were stormtroopers, but the separatists had the plans for the Death Star. And Palpatine was obviously the Emperor, and Sidious. And it's like, you know, Anakin was this huge hero, and yet he's going to become Darth Vader, even though we'd already seen elements of it. So yeah, I have a lot more time for Episode 2 than a lot of other people I've noticed. The only parts I find really tedious in it are some of the romance scenes between Anakin and Padme, and that's only because I find the dialogue, the romantic dialogue between them, so god-awful. But a lot of the, you know, the political machinations, the sort of the who created the clones and why, a lot of those aspects I really enjoy. That's the sort of, yeah, that's the sort of mystery that I quite like, and having it all be anchored by Obi-Wan Kenobi was great. So then, of course, I was really, really excited for Episode 3. By this point, I was reading novels as well. I was involved in the Star Wars novels. I was reading the New Jedi Order, which was coming out at around this time, I believe. And I was really enjoying them. I think the New Jedi Order books are great, and I'll probably do a whole episode devoted to them at some point. I mean, if not discussing the whole Star Wars EU as a whole. But yeah, I'd read some of the expanded universe, but I was especially enjoying the New Jedi Order series. And if anyone hasn't read them, I strongly recommend just read Vector Prime by R.A. Salvatore and see where you go from there. Because I think it's a great introduction to the EU and some of the characters in it. And there's so many awesome moments that follow in that series that, yeah, it's well worth a read. But Episode 3, I remember really being excited for. I watched the first trailer for Episode 3, that trailer that kind of ties in all the previous movies together. Not just the previous prequels, but the original trilogy, by having the dialogue from Alec Guinness where he describes Anakin and his fall into Darth Vader, and they set that alongside scenes from the new film. Oh, I must have watched that trailer so many times. Like watching it on the Apple movies, just like watching it and then refreshing it and then watching it again. I did that constantly. I must have given that thing several thousand views just by myself. So yeah, I was excited for Episode 3 when it came out. And yeah, I went to the cinema, I watched it, I loved it. Episode 3 quickly became, and has probably remained, my favourite Star Wars movie. I think it's a brilliant conclusion to the prequel trilogy and ties it right back to the original trilogy in a way I love. And really kind of anchors the two trilogies together in such a satisfying way. That for me, it just hit all the right buttons. And it is probably the film I've gone back to and rewatched the most out of all of the Star Wars films. I've noticed when I tend to rewatch the Star Wars films, I don't tend to rewatch the prequels. The original trilogy. I tend to rewatch one of the prequels, usually Episode 2 or Episode 3, and more often than not, it's Episode 3. And it's because, yeah, I really like it. And I think even things like the machete order that suggest watching episode 2 and 3 as a giant flashback in between Empire and Jedi. I think in that, episode 3 would work even better if you intercut it with Return of the Jedi and really showed Anakin's fall echoing the steps that Luke is taking in Return of the Jedi. Because Luke he's portrayed quite villainous at certain points of Return of the Jedi. You're meant to think he's following in his father's footsteps until right at the end. Which is great. A lot of people seem to have forgotten that Luke is quite flawed off the back of the sequel trilogy. It's one reason why I really like The Last Jedi. I think The Last Jedi does a great service to Luke as a character. Despite the fact it differs so greatly from the EU, which I also loved. But the sequel trilogy is a discussion for another time. So yeah, obviously, by the time episode 3 came out, I was excited. I'd been involved in the films. I'd watched the Clone Wars micro-series that had come out, the one by Genndy Tartakovsky, the guy behind Samurai Jack. I'd played the video games, I'd read the novels. I was really excited, really enjoying it. And so episode 3 for me was that perfect culmination of everything. And then we learned about the Clone Wars series.
Breaking all units. Violently. 1, 2, Bo-Katan is too many. Captain, want to stabilize the gold 6. Anybody cover me? I got 2 vultures on my tail. Gotta hold them here. Watch your left. I can't shake them. I'll hit. Where's the reinforcements?
Now, as I said, the Clone Wars TV show was not the first thing to explore the concept of the Clone Wars. In between episode 2 and episode 3, Lucasfilm launched what they called the Clone Wars Multimedia Project. Essentially, there was a TV show headed by Genndy Tartakovsky, who, like I said, is the producer and is the showrunner, essentially, responsible for not only Dexter's Laboratory, but most especially Samurai Jack. And he headed up the Star Wars Clone Wars micro-series, which was essentially a series of shorts that aired on Cartoon Network. The first 2 seasons were 10 episodes of about 3 to 5 minutes apiece. And the third series was a series of 5 episodes that were each about 10 minutes long. And so essentially built and told a story. The first 2 seasons focused on pretty much one major battle, that being the Battle of Munalist, early on in the Clone Wars, with Anakin and Obi-Wan both being involved. Series 2, however, was the lead-up to the Battle of Coruscant that launches episode 3, and was designed to be in canon with that. It was to show how Anakin became a Jedi Knight, and how, what Anakin and Obi-Wan were doing, why they were so far away from Coruscant, but also where Jedi such as Mace Windu and Yoda were during the attack on Coruscant. What Jedi were defending Chancellor Palpatine, that sort of thing. It was very good. I really enjoyed it. I've got a lot of time for it. But as I said, it was a multimedia project, so it wasn't just the TV show. There was also tie-in comics, many of which focused on particular characters throughout the course of the Clone Wars. The most popular one being a Jedi Knight known as Quinlan Vos, who George Lucas took a shine to. And these comics also expanded and, along with the micro-series, gave greater roles to Jedi Knights from episode 2, such as Ayla Secura, Kit Fisto, Shak Ti, and a few others who all got, Luminara and Dooley as well, who all got a bit more to do and got some elaboration in the show. There were also novels that did the same thing. There was a couple of video games set during this time period, most notably the Star Wars The Clone Wars video game, which is sort of a vehicle-based combat game, taking place on several planets and tying into the old Tales of the Jedi comic book series, which is set in the era of the Knights of the Old Republic, dealing with a Sith Lord called Exar Kun and his disciple Ulic Qel-Droma. It was pretty good. I quite liked that game. I completed it. It introduced the clone tank, which hadn't been seen in the films, and I don't think would be seen in episode 3, but went on to be included in several other games. Star Wars Battlefront 2 launched around this time period as well, closer to the release of episode 3, and sort of explored the story of the 501st Legion, and took them through several of the major battles that we'd seen in the Clone Wars. Star Wars Battlefront 1, which was also active during this time frame, had tie-in maps and some of the first examples of DLC on the original Xbox, where they introduced the characters of Kit Fisto and Asajj Ventress, who was a new villainess created purely for the Clone Wars multimedia project as sort of a dark Jedi disciple who could act as Dooku's personal assassin. Several other characters got expanded more in the comics and the novels. Republic Commando was also set during this time frame, another very popular game focusing on a group of elite clones. The game is split over several missions, one of which involves starting at the Battle of Geonosis, which is the battle from episode 2. The clone commando characters got explored in a series of novels by Karen Traviss, an author who was working on Star Wars novels at the time, where she tied them quite closely to the Mandalorians and explained a lot of elements there regarding the Mandalorians and their culture, based on what had been established so far in previous comics and series regarding the characters of Boba Fett and Jango Fett, some of which had been thrown into chaos a bit by the reveal in episode 2 of Boba being Jango's clone son. But yeah, she was doing a pretty good job there, tying everything together. So, yeah, that was the Clone Wars multimedia project. I didn't read many of those novels, the Clone Wars specific novels, but I did watch the micro series, and as I said, I played the video games. I played Clone Wars, I played some of Republic Commando. I don't think I ever finished it, but I wasn't as keen on shooters back then as I am now. I'm more comfortable with shooters as a genre now, mainly because I've had a lot of shooter elements forced into a lot of the RPGs I like. And I think it's one I still own on Xbox, so I might go back to it. Battlefront, I played quite a bit, and I didn't play it online, though. I didn't have Xbox Live back in that day. But yeah, I enjoyed it. There was a lot of good stuff here. And there were a lot of interesting new characters. Getting to explore some of these Jedi, seeing characters like Quinlan Vos in the comics, or Asajj Ventress, and seeing them develop and being given these rich backstories that made you want to know more about them. And then some of the Jedi that had appeared in the final battle in Geonosis, like Kit Fisto and Aayla Secura, getting developed into these quite interesting Jedi characters, where it's like, oh, I want to see more of them, and oh, they're quite cool. They've got a personality, and they became characters. So yeah, it was great to see, and I really, really enjoyed it. But that, while it was a precursor, that was always designed to have an end date, which was when episode 3 released. And essentially those 3 years that we spent in real life between the two films of episode 2 and episode 3, All those comics and novels and everything else were designed to bridge that gap and show us the full story of the Clone Wars. And I think they did a good job. I know a lot of fans were very, very pleased. There were some issues already with how the prequels were affecting what had previously been understood to be EU canon, and how the Clone Wars was changing. But for the most part, I think most of the audience generally reacted to it quite well. But then it was announced a few years after the prequel trilogy that the Clone Wars would be getting a second series. Now, Clone Wars was announced at Star Wars Celebration 3 in April 2005. George Lucas announced that they were working on a 3D continuation of the pilot series, which was the micro series. And he hired Dave Filoni after having seen several episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender that Dave Filoni had worked on. By 2005, July 2005, pre-production had begun, and George Lucas was quite heavily involved with Dave Filoni in crafting a lot of this series. Apparently, Dave Filoni ran pretty much every idea they came up with by George Lucas, got approval, got George Lucas's input onto tweaking the storyline, and what they could do with it. The series was designed to be episodic, and this does kind of reflect the original Clone Wars microseries. Season 1 and 2 of that are essentially anthologies. While the overarching story of those first two seasons is the Battle of Munlist, we do cut away at several points. We get a whole episode, two episodes, in fact, I think, dealing with how Asajj Ventress enters Dooku's service. It's at least one whole episode. It might be two. There's an episode set on Mon Calamari with Kit Fisto leading a whole load of undersea clone troopers against the Quarren, who are the octopus-like race that live on that planet. Mon Calamari is Admiral Akbar's homeworld, for those who don't know. The second season, I believe, has a couple of episodes which focus on Luminara Unduli and her Padawan Barriss Ophi travelling to Ilum to craft a new lightsaber so that Barriss can become a Jedi Knight. There's also at least 2 episodes which focus on Mace Windu fighting an army of droids on Dathomir. So it's like, while there was a continuous plot, it was also an anthology. We saw other battlefields of the Clone Wars, and this series was supposed to carry on in that vein. It would be an anthology show. It would be episodic. It wouldn't focus just on Anakin Skywalker's story. We'd have episodes dedicated to clone troopers, to other Jedi, even to the villains in some cases. We also learned that there'd be a new character introduced called Ahsoka Tano, as well as bringing back other characters. We'd have this new character that would join our main cast, as it were, and get developed alongside them, which was met with some skepticism by fans. They had someone brought on to help score the series, with the goal of sort of giving each planet in the galaxy like its own theme music. Kevin Kiner was the one who ended up composing the original score for each episode, and a lot of his work in this is phenomenal. It's very, very Star Wars. It feels very much inspired by all the amazing John Williams film scores that have come before it, while not being beholden to them. There's a lot of bizarre musical choices in some episodes, mixtures of all sorts of different ethnic origin, ethnic origin instruments. So you have you can sort of build a culture from a world by using instruments that here we might find on different corners of the globe, but put them all together to create a unique sound for this alien planet. And I think it works very, very well. And the series was going to come out on Cartoon Network, and it was going to run from 2008. It was going to be kicked off by the first story arc being edited together into a feature film, which released in early 2008, and the series followed soon afterwards. The film, I think as it stands, is the worst reviewed and least commercially successful Star Wars film. But I don't think it's bad at all. I think making it a theatrical film definitely drew attention to the series, but I don't think it works as a theatrical film. I think it works as a television episode, a television film, as like an extended pilot. It was quite good that they brought back some of the celebrity voices for that particular film. They brought back Christopher Lee as Count Dooku, Samuel L. Jackson as Mace Windu. But I don't think it was necessary. I think a lot of the Clone Wars actors that they have do a phenomenal job throughout the series. There's a lot of quite established voice actors involved in this show. Matt Lanter does Anakin Skywalker, James Arnold Taylor does Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ashley Eckstein does Ahsoka, Tom Kane does Yoda, Matthew Wood, who obviously worked at Lucasfilm and did the voice of Grievous in the films. He returns as Grievous in this and does the voice of a lot of all the battle droids, just as he does in Episode 3. But, Terrence C. Carson as Mace Windu in the main show, Ian Abercrombie as Palpatine, Nika Futterman as Asajj Ventress, Catherine Tabor as Padme, and Corey Burton as Count Dooku. They all do a fantastic job. So, as do all the other voice actors. There are so many voice actors that come into this over the years it ran for, that all do a brilliant job. And all the way from, who you would think of as traditional voice actors like Jim Cummings and Robin Atkin Downes, all the way up to, to people like Jon Favreau and Katie Sackhoff, who are more well known for, being in front of the camera rather than just doing a voice. And obviously there are other characters that return from the film series. Anthony Daniels returns as C-3PO. Daniel Logan returned as Boba Fett after playing him in episode 2. Don't know where my head went then. And obviously, there's plenty of other recurring voice talent like Kevin Michael Richardson, Phil Lamar, that just do some brilliant work in this show. And towards the end, there was even a couple of surprise guest stars like Mark Hamill and Liam Neeson, who, did some great work in this. And Sam Witwer as well, when he comes back as a particular character, he was incredible. So yeah, all around, I think Clone Wars was a very, very good show. The animation style is very caricaturish in a way. The character models are similar to sort of the quite pronounced art style of the Genndy Tartakovsky microseries, but smoothed out in some ways. A lot of the colouring is done in a very painted style, which works really well, actually. the sort of the cartoonish style is mainly evident on the characters. A lot of the ships and the special effects in like the space battles and stuff, they are done in the exact same manner as they might be in the films, and as a result look spectacular. And as this is a show that is built around its action, that works very well. The character designs do evolve and change as the series goes on. They become a bit softer and a bit less harsh, and the animation becomes obviously a lot better as it carries on. Season 1 and the original film are probably the weakest in a lot of ways because of everyone just sort of getting used to the technology. The animation becomes a lot more fluid by about sort of the latter half of Series 1 and most of Season 2. And then by about halfway through Season 3, the main characters all sort of get like a slight redesign. And they still have the caricatured faces. But they also sort of just soften more into a bit more recognisable design. And the animation also becomes more fluid as it goes on, which makes the action sequences a lot better, and also allows them to make the characters move with a bit more dynamism and a bit more realisticness. For example, anyone who's seen my Final Space episode, I praised in there how a lot of the characters are doing things on screen, even when they're not speaking. And when characters are speaking, they're emoting, and it's very passionate. There's a lot of that in this. This is very much Star Wars. By its very design, from the ground up, it is Star Wars. It is designed to look and feel and sound and be experienced exactly the same as any of the films, and I think it works very well for that. It ran for a few years. Season 1 came out in 2008. Season 2, which got the subtitle Rise of the Bounty Hunters, started running in 2009, finished in April 2010. Season 3, which was subtitled Secrets Revealed, was 2010 to 2011. Season 4, which was subtitled Battle Lines, ran from 2011 to 2012. And Season 5, which had no subtitle, ran from 2012 to 2013. Season 1 and Season 2 are mostly sort of self-contained episodes. If there were some episodes where plot threads carried on, but never more for like 2 or 3 episodes before the plot moved on to something else. Although one of the first storylines out the gate is regarding a new separatist ship called the Malevolence, which is captained by Grievous, which runs for 3 episodes. And obviously the film was an edited together version of a larger story arc. So it may not be fair to say they were mostly self-contained. There are a few extended storylines in there. However, the extended storylines become much more of a thing as the show goes on, to the point that, for example, Season 5 is totally split into these 4-episode arcs. And that's true of Season 4 as well. Season 4 is split into anywhere from sort of 3 to 5 episode arcs. And it means that some of the sort of done-in-one stories are sort of left by the wayside towards the end of the show. But I do think they should have them as much room as they need to tell the right story. And some of these stories did deserve the extra runtime and work very well with it. However, after Season 5, the show was cancelled. The problem was, Season 6 was already in development. Lucasfilm announced in early 2013 that the Clone Wars would be winding down. And and obviously it was shelved, but season 6 was already in development. 13 episodes were completely finished, and some of the other episodes were well into their planning stages. And so what happened was the completed episodes were released on Netflix as the Lost Missions, making a 13-episode season for season 6. The other episodes became what's called the Clone Wars Legacy Project. Essentially, at the time it was cancelled, 65 more episodes were in production, or different stages of production. So 13 of those got finished and became the Lost Missions, but several additional arcs were in different stages. Of the other episodes, several were turned into other projects. I think 3 sets of episodes were released as what they called animatic story reels on the Star Wars website. I don't think they're on there anymore, unfortunately. But they included a story series called The Crystal Crisis on Utapau, which is 4 episodes where Obi-Wan and Anakin investigate an arms deal. And it's dealing with Anakin's feelings after what happens at the end of episode 5. It was included in the season 6 Blu-ray, though. The Bad Batch episodes were originally aired at Anaheim, Celebration Anaheim, in 2015, but then later got reworked into the eventual Series 7. Of the others, though, 4 episodes became a comic series, which was the Darth Maul Son of Dathomir series, which was released by Marvel Comics. And 8 episodes, which was originally going to be released as 2 4-episode story arcs, focusing on the characters of Quinlan Vos and Asajj Ventress, were turned into a novel by Christie Golden and released as Dark Disciple. I've read Dark Disciple leading up to this for the first time. It's quite good. I really enjoyed it. I was listening to it on Audible as well. And I will say, I don't know if this is true of every Star Wars novel on Audible, but in this one, they have put the effort in to make this feel like Star Wars. There is music, there is sound effects, the actor reading it does very good impressions of most of the main characters' voices, and for any characters where such vocal processing may be needed, they put vocal processing on his voice to make him sound like certain characters. So when he speaks a line as Bosk, they use the same vocal processing they used for Bosk in the animated series. Ditto for when he speaks as one of the battle droids. And yeah, it's very good. Like I said, I don't know if that's true of all Star Wars books in audio form, but it's definitely true of this one, and I totally recommend it on that alone. I kind of hope it does become more common with Star Wars books. I think more audiobooks should do that, to be honest, turn it into an audio drama. Many of the other episodes, though, were just lost to time. Some of them were not far along enough in development to be used, which is a shame. But it is what it is. However, after, Disney acquired Star Wars in 2014, and they kept the Clone Wars as part of Disney's new canon. Now, the canonicity of the Clone Wars had been discussed already. I mentioned this in a previous episode where I discussed the canon within Star Wars. And essentially, because Dave Filoni's Clone Wars series was coming in collaboration with George Lucas. As I said, every story I did was ran past George Lucas. So, to the people making Star Wars canon, it had as much weight, almost, as the films. Which meant it had more weight than any of the novel series that George Lucas wasn't involved in. And so when, for example, the Clone Wars introduced its own version of Mandalore with a completely different lore and backstory to what Karen Traviss was writing, for example, in the Clone Wars Clone Commando series, it annoyed people. To the point that Karen Traviss herself left Star Wars. She stopped working for Lucasfilm. She left the Clone Commando series unfinished because she was that pissed off with it. And I sympathise with her. I really do. I wish maybe they had made more of a concerted effort to keep things canon, and that Dave Filoni hadn't been so willing to just sort of throw things out. But I do get why they did it. I've come to realise with canon is a great thing to have. A canon and a continuity and being able to say that this is why this happened. But I also don't think you should let canon stop you from telling a good story. If you have a good story to tell, but it will break canon in some way, feel free to break that canon. Do it. Explain it if you want in the story, but do it. Tell the story. If the story is worth telling, tell it. Don't let canon hold you back. And I know that view makes me relatively unique in a lot of nerd circles. There's a lot of people who don't seem to share that view. They're like, oh no, canon must be respected. No. You can respect it to a point, but you can always headcanon a way of making something work. You know, if you disagree with it. Like, there's plenty of people who try and headcanon the fact that, you know, certain elements of the MCU, for example, aren't canon to it, like Daredevil, despite evidence to the contrary in the way that the shows are presented and the way characters are being treated. But, you know, if they do a new Daredevil, you know, if the new Daredevil show has nothing to do with the previous Daredevil show, I'll be disappointed. But as long as it's a good story, I'll be fine with it. So, and I think that's the same with the Clone Wars. I think the Clone Wars, you know, it invalidates a lot of the old Clone Wars multimedia project. The novels, the canons, the novels, the series, the comics. But there are elements that can still work with it. And should, you know, and that was what Lucasfilm was trying to do before the Disney merger, is trying to work it so that anything that can still work together will work together. That was where their tiers of canon came in. But once the Disney buyout happened, they didn't need to do that. Disney just said that the films and the Clone Wars series were canon, nothing else was. And I think the impact that that show had is important, with the fact that Disney said that that's the only other thing apart from the films that's canon. And they kept Dave Filoni on. They moved Dave Filoni on to Star Wars Rebels, and he's since gone on to make several other shows with Disney and be involved in, you know, The Mandalorian, The Bad Batch. You know, he's the closest Star Wars has at this point to a Kevin Feige type character. And obviously he has this long history of working with George Lucas and knowing what George Lucas's plans for this series are, which is great. But yeah, as I said, the Clone Wars series, very good. Has a lot of great multi-episode arcs that focus on characters, with mature but still family accessible storytelling. Like, there are some dark moments throughout this. You know, characters can die, but they also can evolve, and the bleak nature of the war can be shown. But, you know, but at the same time, the action is still engaging and thrilling in that traditional Star Wars way. And yes, there can still be quite a few bits of filler, especially in the early seasons, but by the end, pretty much every episode is essential. There's a lot of good stuff to be seen here. And so I, like many, many others, was thoroughly excited when it was announced that Clone Wars was getting a season 7. And this was announced in 2020. You know, it premiered February 2020. It was revealed 2019, I believe. The final seasons, as it was called, is split into 3 4-episode arcs, 2 of which, the Bad Batch arc and the Ahsoka's Walkabout arc, are adaptations of previously developed story reels. And the final one is the Siege of Mandalore, which was always intended to be the conclusion of the show, and had been in development for a while. They could have done far more with the final season, in my opinion, but I get the feeling they wanted to stick with these episodes in particular because they had all been cleared with George Lucas in the same way that the rest of the show had, despite George Lucas not having any direct input on season 7 as a whole in the same way that he did in the previous episodes. But yeah, this final season does conclude the Clone Wars. It concludes a lot of the main story arcs of the Clone Wars series in a way that also ties them into episode 3 in its final moments. And I think combining that with the previous run of the Clone Wars, which was fantastic, helps to make the Clone Wars incredible. Like, it is one of my favourite things in Star Wars that Star Wars has ever produced. And that I've experienced in Star Wars. And together, the whole thing not only makes the prequels better and, you know, makes them better films, but I truly, truly do think it makes episode 3 the best Star Wars film in terms of the narrative weight that it brings to a conclusion. Like I said earlier, episode 3 was built up and I think is a perfect bow to tie off those 2 trilogies and connect the 2 together. You throw Clone Wars into that mix as well, and it works phenomenally. And over the rest of this episode, I'm going to break down what for me are the key plots of the Clone Wars series and how they develop elements of the prequels, but also how they tie into episode 3, where they do, or tie into those final season of the Clone Wars. And yeah, I hope you'll join me for it, because I think it's going to be fun.
Padawan learner, I'm Ahsoka Tano.
I am Obi-Wan Kenobi, your new master.
I'm at your service, Master Kenobi, but I'm afraid I've actually been assigned to Master Skywalker.
What? No. There must be some mistake. He's the one who wanted the Padawan.
No, Master Yoda was very specific. I'm assigned to Anakin Skywalker, and he is to supervise my Jedi training.
I think the first main plot to talk about when discussing the Clone Wars is perhaps the most obvious difference between the Clone Wars and the prequel trilogy, which is the character of Ahsoka Tano. Ahsoka Tano is introduced in the Clone Wars film as a Padawan youngling who is assigned to Anakin Skywalker. Obi-Wan had actually requested a new Padawan, as Anakin was now a Jedi Knight, and so Obi-Wan wanted to teach new Padawan. However, Ahsoka is assigned to Anakin by Master Yoda. Now, Ahsoka herself is a Togrutan Jedi. She's quite headstrong, quite reckless. In fact, she's introduced as quite a flawed character. She's somewhat rebellious. She uses a lot of nicknames for characters, calling Skywalker Sky Guy. You know, she speaks with perfect ease around those around her. We find out that her Jedi Master before Anakin was Plo Koon, who found her as a young child. And she remains quite close with him. Plo Koon actually gets the first major arc in Season 1 as a supporting Jedi Knight, and he's very supportive of Ahsoka. Ahsoka herself, though, she's, as I said, quite headstrong, quite flawed. We see her quite often making rash decisions, ignoring orders, and receiving almost no repercussions for doing so. And naturally, and as expected, this rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way. Like, I want to be clear on this, despite the fact that Ahsoka is a fan favourite now, who has gone on to reappear in Star Wars Rebels, The Mandalorian, and is even getting her own spin-off live-action show. Ahsoka was not a popular character when she was introduced. Like, I think people would have been more forgiving of her if she'd shown some subservience to the characters around her. But I also think that would have led to much more accusations of Mary Sue writing than she got in the first place. Because unlike, I'm not saying Rey is a Mary Sue, but I do see where the accusations of that come from. Rey is a very capable character. She's got a lot of similar elements to her, to how Ahsoka does on paper. You know, they're both quite headstrong, quite willful, quite determined to do the right thing, and quite reckless. But Rey in the sequel trilogy is never shown to be wrong. She's never shown really to fail. Ahsoka is. And for a while, she sort of escapes reprimand from it. But this changes over several early episodes, and this was done deliberately by Dave Filoni, to create a character that he knew people wouldn't like, and then to endear her to us by addressing those flaws that she has in her character. You know, she is shown as disobeying orders while leading a fighter squadron into an ambush. She disobeys an order to come back. As a result, all of her pilots are wiped out, and a cruiser, a Republic cruiser, is destroyed, and another one is damaged quite badly. And her friend, Admiral Yularen, the admiral who serves under Anakin, is injured. So, of course, she feels remorse and regret for that. She leads... That happens in the episode Storm over Ryloth. There's also an episode where... and I believe it's another part of the Ryloth arc, where she's being flanked and she's about to be overrun, and she's valiantly defending her position with a small group of clones. And Anakin flies down to evacuate her, and she almost refuses to go. But Anakin, being able to see the whole battle, knows that she's about to be overrun. And only after he sort of basically drags her on board the ship does she see that that's the case, and that she was about to lose, as she watches the clones that she left behind get massacred by the droids. perhaps her most pivotal episode of development is an episode in season 2 called Lightsaber Lost. On a mission with Anakin to the lower levels of Coruscant, she has her lightsaber stolen. And she then tries to get it back. And she ends up teaming up with a very slow and steady Jedi Master named Terra Sunube. Terra Sunube is basically if a turtle became a Jedi. He's very slow, very methodical, very old, but also very wise. And he teaches Ahsoka throughout this episode that taking a slow path can lead to victory as well. You don't have to rush in and be reckless. And it's one of the most significant episodes of character development that Ahsoka gets. And also is a great introduction to the character of Sunube, who later reappears in the Kenobi series as a victim of Darth Vader and the Inquisitors, which moved quite a lot of people when he appeared in that episode. So yeah, Ahsoka is a very well-developed character, despite her, her off-screen friendships that are developed with several of these Jedi. Her and Barriss Offee are quite close, but we see Barriss Offee acting... Offee? We see Barriss acting in a much more reverent way to her own Jedi Master, Luminara, as well as Anakin and the other characters around her. And that acts in stark contrast to Ahsoka. But eventually we get to the point where Ahsoka is helping Anakin and Obi-Wan in a lot of their fights. She's very well respected by the pair of them, by several other Jedi Masters, and by their clone commanders, both Captain Rex and Commander Cody. We then also see how she is trusted by numerous other characters. And, not just the characters we expect, like Padme obviously trusts her because Anakin trusts her. She's Anakin's Padawan. So we see episodes of her with Padme and they interact and it's quite sweet. But also there's a mission where they have to rescue Jedi Master Even Peel and his own Republic soldiers, including Admiral Tarkin. Yes, that Tarkin from the original Star Wars trilogy. And Even Peel trusts her. Like, when he dies and he has to pass over a vital piece of information, he trusts Ahsoka with it. And this does rub Tarkin out the wrong way, but that's a different story. Tarkin earns the trust. Skywalker earns Tarkin's trust. Ahsoka not so much. But she also gets saved by Chewbacca in an episode. She meets and interacts with the son of a separatist senator called Lux Bonteri. And his mother, Mina Bonteri, is killed. And his father was killed as a separatist soldier, was killed by clones in a battle. So he has every reason to hate the Jedi. Him and Ahsoka form quite a close bond. And, Lux Bonteri then goes on to, get Ahsoka's help when he's captured by a group called Death Watch. He appeals to her, as well as other characters, to help form a resistance movement on Onderon. The character of Bo-Katan, who I'll be covering in more detail a bit later on, trusts Ahsoka, who was her enemy, to help her fight Darth Maul. You know, it's all... She earns the trust of a lot of characters and the confidence of a lot of characters because she proves herself. She is capable in battle. You know, she gets trusted by... She becomes almost like the close guardian of Prince Lee Char during the invasion of Mon Cala. So, yeah. She goes from being a very flawed character to a very, very capable character by getting actual character development. And it's done very well. And we see how that impacts her relationship with Anakin and Obi-Wan, how she brings them closer together as well, how she helps to mature Anakin. Like, Anakin becomes a much more capable character, because essentially when we start the Clone Wars, it's several months, say 6 months after Episode 2. Anakin is still quite close to his portrayal in Episode 2. He's a bit more experienced, but he can still be angry. He can still be unsure of himself. He can still be, you know, lack the confidence that he gets later. The Anakin that we see in Episode 3 is a much more capable warrior, but also more at ease with himself, more confident in his own skills, even showing an ability to lead in certain respects. And a lot of that is down to his development with Ahsoka as her mentor, as her trainer. So then the question becomes, well, where is Ahsoka during Episode 3? This was explained in the closing arc of Season 5 of the Clone Wars. A bomb goes off inside the Jedi Temple, inside the main hangar. And it looks like the bomb was planted by a Jedi. And, you know, there's an investigation, but it looks like Ahsoka planted that bomb. And she is brought before a tribunal by Tarkin. You know, put on trial, exiled from the Jedi Order. Despite the fact that she's innocent. Despite the fact that she knows she's innocent. How she tries to investigate it. And her strong proclamations of her innocence compel Anakin to investigate. And that's when Anakin finds the real culprit, Barriss. You know, how the war has corrupted Barriss and she took the steps to plant the bomb. And Anakin manages to clear Ahsoka's name. But it's... by then it's too late. Her name's cleared, but she's already been punished by the Jedi. So despite the fact the Jedi offer her the chance to return, she walks away from them. She feels betrayed by the Jedi. You know, at a loss from them. You know, the Jedi have failed her. As I'll explain how they've failed so many other people throughout the Clone Wars. And Anakin begs with her not to go. Like, begs with her, saying he understands her desire to leave, but she can't leave. But she has to. She leaves. She leaves Anakin alone. And we see that change Anakin. Anakin, who was already starting to struggle with his own anger, his anger coming back in waves towards the end of the arcs, towards the latter half of the series, as he's dealing with slavers and all these other cruel, evil beings profiting off of the Clone Wars. And the anger that he feels as he pursues exactly what's happened to Ahsoka. And how much more of that darkness he will then continue to embrace going forward. And it makes it clear why Anakin himself feels so betrayed by the Jedi in Episode 3, why he's willing to turn on them, why he sees them as a failure, and how he's so easily corrupted by Darth Sidious. Because we see the loss that he's felt at Ahsoka leaving. Being forced out. But even when Ahsoka leaves, her character development doesn't stop. She returns in Season 7 in two major story arcs. The first, we see her encounter Rafa and Trace Martez, two sisters in the lower levels of Coruscant. Rafa kind of trying to trade and trying to better their position by getting involved with criminal elements, and trying to make a better life for her and her sister. And Ahsoka sees how they've been kept almost away from the war. It's affecting them, but, you know, despite the Jedi thinking that these are the people they're fighting for, the war hasn't affected Rafa and Trace necessarily. And when it does, they're the biggest effect the war has on them is when Zero the Hutt escaped from prison and a speeder crashed into the wall of their apartment and killed their parents. And they tell this story to Ahsoka to explain their distrust and their hatred of the Jedi. And we see that, you know, we see through them that they're probably not alone in that assessment. Many other people probably feel the same about the Jedi. The Clone Wars is having a negative effect across the galaxy. People will turn on the Jedi. And that makes it... That also as well explains elements such as Palpatine's takeover. You know, we see from the reaction of Tarkin and how he treats Ahsoka and how Ahsoka interacts with him, that he doesn't trust the Jedi either. And he's a military officer in the Grand Army of the Republic who works for the Jedi. But he's also the one that pursues and prosecutes her when she's on trial. And that experience within the Jedi, as well as outside of the Jedi, changes Ahsoka herself. And I think that's what's made her such a fan favourite. And I definitely think she is the standout character of the Clone Wars. There are many, many, many great characters in the Clone Wars. And there's a reason the Clone Wars remain canon, and there's a reason it's a well that writers have gone back to pick characters from. And as much as Star Wars does have an element of, it's the much parodied, the glup shito meme, where it's like a random character will appear, and it's usually either a character from the comics or from the Clone Wars, who general audiences have no idea who they are. But fans of either the comics or the Clone Wars will be able to say, oh, it's that character, and they're going to be super important later on. And Marvel have started doing this as well to a certain point, but nowhere near to the extent that Star Wars has. But you can see why, even with those types of characters, Ahsoka is the one that people have gravitated towards and latched onto and want to see more of. Because she has the most complete character and the most complete arc of any original character in the Clone Wars. And even more than some of the Jedi. You know, her, Anakin, and Obi-Wan are the three leads of this show. And even when she's written out of it for Series 6, her presence is still felt. We feel her loss as it affects Anakin and Obi-Wan. Less so Obi-Wan, but very much Anakin. And the scenes of the three of them together are fantastic. They feel like a found family. You know, where they're in episodes such as the Mortis arc in Season 3. And the three of them are together, and Obi-Wan has a line, as long as the three of us stay together, nothing can go wrong. And we feel that. We feel that they will be safe together. And so the removal of Ahsoka and how that affects Anakin is the first big step in Anakin's downfall.
This is about more than just following orders. It is. It is about honor. Where is the honor in marching blindly to our deaths? It is not our call. We are part of something larger. We are not independent of one another. I'm sorry, I cannot just follow orders when I know they're wrong. Especially when lives are at stake. You will if you support the system we fight for. I do support it. I do. But I am not just another number. None of us are. Fives, where are you going? To round up some pilots.
It's hard to have the Clone Wars without having clones. The clones are the soldiers of the Republic, and every single one of them in this show shares the same voice actor. They are all voiced by D. Bradley Baker, regardless of what the character is. And for my money, I don't think D. Bradley Baker got enough praise for his work on Clone Wars. His skills in this, the way he is able to make all of the clones sound unique in terms of their mannerisms or their cadence, just with the words that he uses, is nothing short of impressive. You know, the little bit I had prefacing this was two clone characters talking, Rex and Fives. But it's very easy to determine, even while listening, which clone is speaking, despite them sharing the same voice. Now, there are several clone characters that were developed through things like the visual dictionaries and novels who were named in between Episode 2 and Episode 3. And a lot of those characters do reappear in the Clone Wars. We see Commander Cody, who is the clone commander who was serving under Obi-Wan Kenobi. He reappears as the same role he has previously, which was the main clone commander serving under Obi-Wan Kenobi. We see Commander Gree, who is the clone trooper who attempts to kill Yoda during Order 66, appear for a story arc. We see Oddball, the clone pilot who is killed in the opening moments of the space battle in Episode 3, appear in several engagements with Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan. We see Citadel security guard Fox, who appears several times around the, the Senate Council chambers, and I think he's also plays a role in the conspiracy arc where Ahsoka is sentenced. But the main additions are the new clones. In fact, one of the very first episodes of Clone Wars is a single solitary episode. It's the very first episode of the series after the film. It's an episode called Ambush, which features Yoda and 3 clones. I believe there were more, but only 3 survived to help Yoda in the battle. And Yoda, in his wisdom and appreciation for all life, explores the concept of the 3 clones and how they are all alike but different. At one point asking them to remove their helmets and, giving some insight into each of them, despite one of the clones assuring him that they all have the same face. Which they do, but they also don't. The clones are shown to style their hair differently, or wear facial tattoos, or other sort of markings that can differentiate them. And that's how it goes for most of the clones that we see. The main new additions are Captain Rex, who is a clone captain assigned to Anakin Skywalker and a member of the 501st Legion. The 501st Legion is the legion that marches with Anakin to the Jedi Temple during Order 66. Now, Rex is... The 501st Legion, by the way, as well, is also the fan-made name, I believe it's a fan-made name, for the fans who dress as stormtroopers. You know how usually when you see like official events, official Star Wars events, and there'll be fans that are in Star Wars suits of armour as stormtroopers, clone troopers, what have you. They are the 501st Legion. They organise all around the world. Fun little tidbit. So Rex is one of the commanding officers of the 501st and works quite closely with Anakin. And there's a real strong camaraderie between them, the real sort of brothers-in-arms feeling. Rex has a few interesting quirks. He keeps his head shaved. He has tally marks on his helmet, presumably for kills, although due to animation restrictions, the tally marks never change throughout the series, which is a bit of a shame. He uses twin pistols rather than using a blaster rifle, and he's just quite capable, very, very capable, and more than willing to do whatever is necessary, but still with the full trust of not just his men, but also the Jedi that he serves with. But we do see other clones. Rex isn't the only clone that we get focus on. 2 of the other main ones that we see develop, and we see them develop from rookies. We get Clone Wars, like I said, is an anthology series. There are some episodes that are shown out of order. So we're introduced in season 1 to 2 shinies, as the clones like to call them. Their armour is all shiny and new because they haven't been in battle yet. So 2 shinies known as Echo and Fives. And they go on to get considerable development. In that first episode, they team up with Cody and Rex. And together this unit of clones repels a droid invasion on a listening post that Rex and Cody were visiting at the time. And yeah, they prove very capable soldiers, and so Rex takes them under his command as members of the 501st. And as they progress, they become ARC troopers in season 3. Special commandos, essentially. Fives especially becomes an ARC trooper. I can't remember if Echo does. I think he does, but I can't remember. And we also get to see them as cadets. There's a flashback episode in season 3 showing them when they were in the academy as cadets and how they graduated, how their unit graduated. So it's great to see that development, see these 2 characters that keep recurring and keep being explored. And we see them in several different engagements over the war. And at one point, Echo is believed killed, lost on a mission. Fives continues to work very, very closely with Rex and grows into a character who is very unafraid to speak his mind, as in the clip I showed before. He is willing to stand up to Rex if he believes Rex is wrong and to advise him differently. And it earns Fives Rex's respect as well as Anakin's respect. We also get to see other characters, some of which recur, such as Tup and Jesse, who are 2 other members of the 501st, and the clone officers Waxer and Boyle, who appear in a few episodes, and several others who might only get focus in one story arc, such as Dogma or Hardcase, where they don't get a huge amount of screen time or a huge amount of development, but they play quite pivotal roles in a particular arc. And it's good that we get these characters that are able to be developed like this, and there's long moments of certain episodes that just feature clones. And yeah, I really like it. I really, really like it. And it humanizes the clones, and, because the clones, both in episode 2 and episode 3, as well as a lot of the Clone Wars, feel very non-human. I think part of the reason Clone Wars is able to be as violent as it is a lot of the time is because while being humanoid, a lot of the characters don't have their faces shown. There are some quite graphic moments of violence at some points that were edited by Cartoon Network. Like, for example, there's one episode where Sarge Ventress kills a clone and then kisses him as he dies after killing him with her lightsaber. She, ignites her lightsaber and uses the Force to pull him onto it and then kisses him as he dies. And it's very, very dark for what is ostensibly a children's animated show. Because obviously he's helmetless at the time, so you see his face in agony. Whereas a lot of the time, a lot of the more violent acts that we see towards clones and later other armies like the Mandalorians are usually done when they're armoured, or in the case of aliens that we see killed, they're usually non-human. Like the Geonosians. So, and especially in episode 2 and 3, where despite Tamura Morrison playing certain clones, there were no clone armor suits ever made for episode 2 or 3. They were all CGI. Every single one of them is CGI. Which in itself is phenomenally impressive considering how many there were, especially in the early 2000s, and especially the quality that they show. But it does leave the clones in the two films feeling very faceless, which isn't the case in Clone Wars. The clones of the Clone Wars animated series are very humanized. And it also then makes that more important when they turn on the Jedi, when they, the actions that they take as in episode 3, as the clones evolve to, into the Imperial Stormtroopers. And we see that transition through Order 66. We see Cody, the friendship and camaraderie he's built up with Obi-Wan, and how he then turns on him and orders his men to shoot him. I'm going to cover Order 66 in a bit more detail when I get there, but it's very easy to suspect that a lot of the clone commanders that we see executing Jedi there have had similar relationships with their Jedi. We also get one quite nice story early on where we see a clone who has left the war, which I really liked as a storyline. He deserted the war, and has now formed a family as like a simple homesteader on a planet. And I've forgotten his name. I want to say Cutter, but I get a feeling that might be wrong. And, Rex encounters him, and Rex tries to get him to come back and to the battle, and he won't. But it's good. I like it. It's a nice touch. And one of the final arcs, introduces the Bad Batch, which is a group of defective clones who lead a mission to save Echo after the Rex realizes that he might still be alive due to separatists using plots that Rex and Echo came up with. I've got more to say about the clones, but it's more plot related to some of the other elements that I want to talk to, so we'll get there in a bit. But yeah, I think the development of the clones is very interesting. There's also one quite nice moment where they discuss their feelings on the Clone Wars. I believe it's Rex who does it. And he's talking to, again, either Anakin or Ahsoka. And he says how the clones have mixed feelings on the war. Because while they don't necessarily want to be soldiers, they also recognize that they were created to be soldiers. They wouldn't exist were it not for the Clone Wars. And it creates a very unique position for them. And it's only a brief moment, but it does echo some of the tragedy behind the clones. And it's like, this war is hard on everyone, even the soldiers fighting it. Even though they were created for it. And yeah, it's just a nice, poignant moment quite early on. But yeah, I do like the development of the clones, and I think there's several clone characters that are very fun to watch develop and recur during this series. And obviously, because some of the clones become familiar faces, when you lose them, because clones do die in this, quite often, in fact. And when you lose a character you've cared about, especially if it's in a major storyline or with some intense twist, you feel it. Even some of the recurring characters like Wolf, who you may not see very often. Wolf is a clone commander who serves under Plo Koon. You feel it when they are lost. It is a loss. And I think humanizing the army of the Clone Wars is something that this show needed to do, because, as I said, in episode 2 and 3 especially, they just feel faceless. So seeing how they are made into characters and recognised as people makes them a lot more interesting.
My dear, you were brilliant.
Thank you. But perhaps we should wait till we actually win the vote before we make a victory speech.
What a novel idea. Imagine that. Amidala's actually making sense for once in her life.
Senator Bertoni, this is a private conversation.
Private conversation or separatist conspiracy?
How dare you? We are not pro-separatist. We want to end the war. Committing more troops to the front lines will not allow diplomacy to resume.
Diplomacy failed the Republic long ago.
One of the biggest and most derided elements of the prequel trilogy is the politics, the political aspect of it. You know, from the opening crawl of episode 1, it's clear that there is a political drama story going on here. And I think that rubs a lot of people along the wrong way, because, you know, episode 1 starts because of a trade dispute, which is boring in comparison to evil empire with a rebellion that you had in the original trilogy. However, because I'm a sucker for world building and good development like that, I really enjoy the world building aspects of the political elements of the prequel trilogy. And so one of my favourite things about episode 3 was the deleted scenes that show Padme, Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, and several other characters building what would one day become the rebellion. It was good to see that, and I think losing those scenes does episode 3 a disservice. However, I know on the old Holocron, a lot of those deleted scenes were still treated as being canon. I don't know if this is still the case under the Jedi canon, under the, you know, the Disney canon. But I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be. A lot of them do not conflict with any other sources. And as I said, on the original Jedi Holocron, they were kept because they were what George Lucas intended them to be. They were the recognition from Padme, Bail, and a few others that the Clone Wars were winding down, and yet Palpatine had amassed more and more political power. And we were getting to the point where would he relinquish that power as the Clone Wars came to an end? And this element is present in Clone Wars as well. And there are some very, very good political manipulations and political storylines anchored around what, on the surface, are quite boring ideas. You know, Senator Bertoni, who is the senator for Camino, wanting to introduce a bill to fund more clone troops, which would prolong the war, because obviously it gives her planet more money, you know, because the Kaminoans get to create a load more clones. But at the same time, that's essentially a bill that creates more soldiers, that encourages the militarization, and so is opposed by Padme and Bail and their allies. You know, a bill to deregulate the banks, to create more money, to put the banks in the control of Palpatine, and have it so that the power of the banking clan is in the hands of the Chancellor. But it's all done with political manipulation, but away from the Senate for the most part. You know, there are murders and plots and kidnappings and all sorts of other things, and it's all being done with the goal of Palpatine trying to disrupt this growing rebellion that he's facing in the Senate. And it is quite clever, and I really enjoy quite a lot of it. You know, Palpatine's forces quite clearly playing at things to undermine any sort of effort to restrict his power or to bring this war to a close. And, like, at one point, Padme goes off, like I said, she goes off and speaks with Mina Bonteri, who is a separatist senator. And we find out that the separatists do have their own senate, at which Count Dooku is a member and their leader. And Padme tries to appeal to Mina Bonteri, who she's known for years as a mentor, to sue for peace. And so Dooku, in collaboration with Sidious, has Mina Bonteri assassinated. And it made to look like the Republic have done it, in order to prolong the conflict and to to earn reprisals from the separatists. Or, a political ally of Padme's, Onaconda Farr, a Rhodian senator. He is manipulated to get relief for Rhodia quite early on. He's manipulated by the separatists into essentially handing them, prisoners, political prisoners that have arrived on his world, including Padme, and betraying them, because it's going to get support for his planet. And he then turns on them and, the day is saved and what have you. But then that plotline comes back in a later episode where another Rhodian poisons him in retaliation for his betrayal of their people. It is clever. It's very clever how, they keep this focused on, this is a cartoon, an action-focused cartoon and a Star Wars cartoon, but it's a family-focused cartoon. And because of how cartoons and animation are treated in the West, this is designed for children. And by keeping the story focused on the characters and the action scenes, everything progresses apace in a way that is thrilling. The episodes with the banking clan involve a character called Rush Clovis, who is a banker that Padme has been friends with, and they focus this on the characters by introducing an element of jealousy between Anakin and Padme over Padme's relationship with Clovis. Anakin becomes jealous of Clovis and unsure of his motives. And it turns out he has right to be wary of Clovis's motives in terms of his true allegiance. Clovis is more aligned to the Separatists. And then Clovis returns in Season 6 to kind of redeem himself, and Anakin already doesn't trust him. But, Anakin's original issue with him is due to jealousy rather than suspicion, like any actual suspicion. It's relationship suspicion rather than political suspicion. And yeah, I think it's quite clever, and I think it does a very good job of developing these characters. And it would definitely have been improved if the deleted scenes featuring that future Rebel Alliance had been kept in episode 3. But I still think it works. We see Bail and Padme play quite strong supporting roles in several scenes of episode 3. We see Padme's reaction to Palpatine declaring himself Emperor. We see Bail as someone we can trust because of his close relationship with Padme. And this is even without looking at the elements of Palpatine's power. Like, in the episode Lightsaber Lost that I mentioned earlier, there's a bit where Ahsoka is hanging from a billboard above Coruscant. And on this billboard, Palpatine is talking about a new Securities Act that he's just put in place, which will allow greater surveillance on suspected enemies of the state. It's very much sort of inspired by the American Patriot Act that was enacted after 2001 September 11th attacks. But it feels like something that's believable in this universe, and also feels like, you know, it's a background detail. It's not the focus of the scene or the focus of the episode, but it shows that Palpatine is amassing power, which is the element that Padme and others are nervous about in episode 3. And then, of course, there's the one final twist of a knife during a season 5 episode. I believe it's season 5, maybe season 4. Where Padme does something to foil one of Palpatine's plans. One of the separatist plans as Sidious. And Masamida, the blue guy who follows the Chancellor around, sort of says to him, you know, what are we going to do about her? And Palpatine has this very dark moment. And I think at this point, Palpatine was... This is why I think it was season 5, because I think this was after the original actor for Palpatine had passed and had been replaced by Tim Curry, because I do remember this particular voice for Palpatine sounding a lot more sinister. But he basically implied that Padme would have to be dealt with. And we see that through his manipulation of Anakin, Padme is dealt with. She is killed by, you know, Palpatine's manipulation of Anakin and what that leads Anakin to do. So yes, very, very clever. How they keep the political elements at play from the Clone Wars, from the prequel trilogy, but focus them in new ways. And in ways where these stories keep echoing and keep coming back. And also in a way that develops a lot of these background characters. You know, someone like Onaconda Farr is a character in episode 2. He appears, he was named in the visual dictionaries. And then he doesn't reappear in episode 3. The Clone Wars explains what happens to him by having him be killed. Several of the other senators as well. Not just the ones who appeared in episode 3, like Mon Mothma. You know, the deleted scenes of episode 3. They get appearances in the Clone Wars here, developing them before they appear in episode 3. It's very, very well done. And I think it takes those political themes and, you know, to an adult audience especially, a lot of this political nuance will get picked up on, especially if you do know anything about politics, if you were aware of the sort of things that happened in American politics, like I said, during the War on Terror, and can see the echoes and the parallels of all that here. And you essentially see the Republic declining into fascism. And it's only through watching everything Palpatine does and everything that happens in these political stories that you really kind of understand why they embrace and cheer and applaud Palpatine's declaration of naming himself Emperor. Because it all makes sense when you watch this.
For generations, my ancestors fought proudly as warriors against the Jedi. Now, that woman tarnishes the very name Mandalorian. Defend her, if you will. This lightsaber was stolen from your Jedi temple by my ancestors during the fall of the Old Republic. Since then, many Jedi have died upon its blade. Prepare yourself to join them.
These next two sections, while not necessarily elements of the Clone Wars that enhance Episode 3, I do think are definitely worth talking about here because they do enhance Star Wars as a whole. Now, this particular one is Mandalore and how the Mandalorians are developed and explored throughout the series of the Clone Wars. Mandalore is introduced in Season 3, I believe. It is led by Duchess Satine Kryze, who is a former lover, I think it's implied, of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Mandalore is a planet at peace. However, a planet with a long history where Mandalorian warriors at the fall of the Old Republic fought the Jedi Order. Now, those warriors are known as the adherents to the old ways, and there is a cult of them called the Death Watch, and they are revealed to be led by a character called Pre Vizsla. Pre Vizsla is determined to return Mandalore to its roots, feeling that it's lost its way. And essentially, Mandalore becomes almost a microcosm for what is going on in the Star Wars galaxy as a whole, in that Pre Vizsla, like Palpatine, is essentially a fascist leader, wanting to seize power, wanting to return to a way of war. But doing it in perhaps more of a nationalistic way rather than a completely greedy, megalomaniacal way, such as Palpatine is. Pre Vizsla genuinely believes that Mandalore is weaker under Satine. But it does echo the sort of the growing darkness and the descent into fascism with the Republic. And this is something that George Lucas said he wanted to explore with the prequels. So it becomes very clear why he influenced this storyline. I will say, like I said, the Mandalore, the changes to Mandalore and the Mandalorians themselves have been the most controversial thing about the Clone Wars, like by far. As I said earlier, Karen Traviss left Lucasfilm, left her association with the Republic Commando novels because essentially the changes that Dave Filoni and George Lucas introduced to Mandalore invalidated so much of her work. And Dave Filoni was aware of this when he created this story. He apparently went to George Lucas with copies of everything that had been written about Mandalore and the Mandalorians while proposing this storyline. And George Lucas, who, while always being aware of the novels and the comic books and everything, has no qualms about getting rid of stuff or overwriting stuff himself if it interferes with his vision, was more than happy to approve Filoni's story and invalidate years, decades at this point worth of content. Jango Fett in Episode 2 is ostensibly a Mandalorian. He's introduced as such. However, he is dismissed by President Olmec, who is Prime Minister Olmec, as a vagabond mercenary in a suit of stolen armor. So it does raise the question of whether Jango and Boba Fett are Mandalorians in this, without providing a definite answer. The Death Watch are defeated and almost exiled from Mandalore, but they grow in number in their exile. They encounter Lux Bonteri and Ahsoka in one episode, and we are introduced to Pre Vizsla's Lieutenant Bo-Katan, who we later find out is the sister of Satine. Bo-Katan's voiced by Katie Sackhoff. Pre Vizsla is voiced by Jon Favreau. There's a lot of very good casting around the Mandalore characters in general. They were all very clearly designed from the off to be characters who would recur and reappear through the latter half of this series. And, you know, they become an important point towards the end of the Clone Wars when Mandalore is seized in sort of the later stages of Season 5. Mandalore is seized, Satine is killed. You know, despite her efforts to remain out of the Clone Wars, like Mandalore under Satine is desperately trying to stay neutral, to not pick a side between the Republic and the Separatists. But it becomes clear that, you know, Pre Vizsla, at least at the start, is in the pocket of Dooku. You know, and how Count Dooku wants to use the Death Watch to gain power on Mandalore by removing Satine and bringing Mandalore into the fold. Mandalore, as I said, is captured. It's taken by the Death Watch, who by this point have a new leader, not Pre Vizsla. And Satine is killed. But the new leader also kills Pre Vizsla. And Bo-Katan and several others flee, while several others, led by Gar Saxon, remain loyal to the new leader. And this all then culminates in the final 4 episodes of the Clone Wars, which, like I said, to me, are presumably the very reason this Season 7 even exists, which is a storyline that is best described as the Siege of Mandalore, where Ahsoka Tano, exiled from the Jedi Order, recruited by Bo-Katan, leads Captain Rex and a unit of clone commandos, a unit of clones under her command, well, under Rex's command, technically, because she's not anymore a member of the Grand Army, to Mandalore to help Bo-Katan's loyal Mandalorians reclaim the planet and bring the new Lord of the Death Watch to justice. And it is fantastic. It is great. You know, the visuals are incredible. These final episodes are developed so well. And they are a culmination of the biggest, longest running plot thread within the Clone Wars series. And they are done so well. Like, Ray Park comes back to do motion capture for these final 4 episodes. Their production budget is increased. They use more music from episode 3, and they take place at the same time as episode 3. Like, you could watch these final 4 episodes with episode 3 and it would make one long, cohesive 4-hour film. And in fact, I encourage you to do so. There are certain points where you can just sort of pause episode 3 and go back to one of these episodes. And I suppose if it wasn't for Mandalore and the situation on Mandalore, Anakin wouldn't lose his 2 closest allies in the final moments of the war, which would be what allows Palpatine to really get his hooks into Anakin, because the minute Anakin finds Ahsoka again, she's taken away from him, and she takes Rex with her. And it's very, very well done. So yeah, the Mandalore arc is incredible, and if you've seen no other episodes of Clone Wars ever, you at least owe it to yourself to watch those final 4. But the final 4 episodes also hinge on the return of another character, who is a bit more of a spoiler, and I have briefly mentioned earlier, and that's Darth Maul.
Jedi, I have been waiting for you.
I'm not sure I've made your acquaintance.
I am surprised you could have forgotten me so easily after I killed your master and you left me for dead on Naboo.
It is you.
You may have forgotten me, but I will never forget you. You cannot imagine the depths I would go to stay alive, fueled by my singular hatred for you.
That may be so, but I defeated you before, and I can defeat you again.
Don't be so certain.
In Season 4 of The Clone Wars, Count Dooku is essentially ordered by Darth Sidious, Palpatine, to remove his his dark Jedi disciple, Asajj Ventress. And Dooku turns on her and tries to have her executed. Ventress goes on the run and returns to her home planet of Dathomir. While on Dathomir, a dark force user called Mother Talzin, you know, a strong presence in the dark side, sort of helps her create a new Dathomiri male to act as her weapon against Dooku. The Dathomiri that she selects is transformed through dark side magic into the character of Savage Opress. And Savage is presented by Mother Talzin to Dooku as his new student, his new dark side disciple. But then Asajj and Savage unsuccessfully try to assassinate Dooku. In doing so, Asajj goes off and becomes a bounty hunter and gets a nice little story arc there. Meanwhile, Savage is given the mission by Mother Talzin of finding his brother, Darth Maul, who was believed dead over a decade prior during the Battle of Naboo in Episode 1. He doesn't find Darth Maul until the end of Season 4, the final episode, which is called Brothers, I believe. But he brings Darth Maul back to Mother Talzin, and Mother Talzin heals Darth Maul. They give him new bionic legs to make up for the ones he's lost. When they originally find him, he's almost feral and is riding on a spider body, like a living spider that he's sort of subsumed to his will. Very impressive, very terrifying. And then Darth Maul and Savage Opress decide to get revenge on not just Dooku, but the Jedi as well, specifically Obi-Wan Kenobi, who has also encountered Savage and humbled him several times in battle. Maul becomes a main antagonist throughout Season 5. He gets quite a lot of development in the early half, and then some more towards the end. Season 5 is split very, very definitely into several quite long story arcs. And Maul is good. he is mainly concerned about seeking revenge on Obi-Wan Kenobi, but his return becomes so much more important when he becomes involved in the Mandalore plotline. He encounters the Death Watch. The Death Watch save the lives of him and Savage, who are drifting in space after their encounter with Asajj and Obi-Wan in a previous episode. And Darth Maul, it proves himself to be quite a canny manipulator by bringing together a lot of underworld groups, such as the Black Sun, who previously appeared in the novel series, well, the original novel and multimedia project Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, the Pike Syndicate, who would go on to reappear in Solo, and the Hutt Cartel, as well as several other different underworld forces. And they all come together under Darth Maul's leadership. They encounter the Jedi. Savage is killed. But with the Death Watch and his criminal cartels, Darth Maul is able to take control of Mandalore. And the influence he's exerting causes him to fight with Pre Vizsla, where he executes Pre Vizsla. Darth Maul becomes the shadow ruler of Mandalore. He is briefly beaten by Darth Sidious. Darth Sidious turns up on Mandalore and fights both him and Savage, kills Savage, and captures Darth Maul. And unfortunately, this is where the cancellation of Clone Wars actually becomes a detriment, because 4 of the unproduced episodes became a comic series called Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir, where they explore how Maul escapes from Palpatine, well, Darth Sidious, his interactions with Dooku, and how he sort of is saved by the Death Watch, led by Gar Saxon, and returns to Mandalore to continue to rule there. And having that bit missing from the main episodes is a shame, but the comic series is freely available. You can find it as a graphic novel, you can find it on Marvel Unlimited. So it's very easy to find if you do want to read it. I do recommend reading it. It's a very quick read, but it has all the action elements that you would expect from a Clone Wars story. Maul is then opposed by Bo-Katan, and Bo-Katan hires Ahsoka to come back to Mandalore to fight him and defeat him. And that is Darth Maul becomes the big threat that they have to capture. And in those final 4 episodes that tie into episode 3, Darth Maul sort of realizes what's about to happen, and he sees a vision of Skywalker's fall. And sees it due to perceiving it in the Force. And he wants to help Skywalker, presumably for his own ends, but he wants also to undermine Sidious. He is vengeful against his former master. And it's a nice touch. Him and Ahsoka also form an uneasy truce during a couple of these final episodes, when they both find themselves under attack by clones during Order 66. And Darth Maul shows the power at his command when he's able to essentially destroy a Star Destroyer while it's in flight. And bring it down for a crash landing. But I think one of the most important things that Darth Maul does, and how it impacts after Episode 3, in terms of what it does for the original trilogy, is he brings together the underworld. There is an underworld in the prequel trilogies, but it is nowhere near as dramatic as it is in the original trilogy. The Hutt Cartel just has a lot more control, or a lot more visible control, in the prequel trilogy. And even by the time of the sequel trilogy, there's still a really active criminal element. And I think you can pin a lot of that on Darth Maul's creation of his syndicate, and what that means going forward. So yeah, I do think it's a nice idea. But yeah, bringing back Darth Maul and making him incredible for this. And as I said, Ray Park comes back to do motion capture for those final 4 episodes for his lightsaber fight against Ahsoka. He's voiced by Sam Witwer, who appears earlier on in the Clone Wars series as the sun on the planet of Mortis, which I'll cover in more detail later on. It's just very, very, very well done. I was a big fan of the idea of bringing Darth Maul back. I was dubious about it when they first announced it, but watching those episodes, yeah, I'm a definite fan of that idea, because it improves the Clone Wars. It gives them a good antagonist to fight against, and most importantly for, Episode 3, it gives a reason to separate Anakin from his essential people, the people that he needs. Ahsoka even calls him out on it, that that Anakin and Obi-Wan are leaving because the Chancellor needs them, not that the Jedi needs them, not that the people need them, but the Chancellor needs them. And because of that, they can't stop Darth Maul, who is a definite threat. Yeah, it's very clever. Very, very clever. And especially because the Clone Wars was already hampered by the fact that General Grievous and Anakin could never encounter each other, because canonically their first appearance is at the start of Episode 3, where they first meet face to face, due to their dialogue. Even to the point that Grievous can't have seen Anakin on a holo because he thinks he'd be older. So yeah, the introduction of Maul and Opress is essentially done to give them more opponents to fight, but it's done so well, and Maul has some standout moments in the show. The fight with Sidious at the end of Season 5 especially is incredible. It's a good look at the threat that Darth Sidious poses before we get that reveal in Episode 3, where he fights Mace Windu and the other Jedi Masters. So yeah, very impressive, and I'm glad Darth Maul returned. And Darth Maul's inclusion is an example of one that doesn't just make Episode 3 better, it makes the whole prequel trilogy better, so bonus for that.
Will we ever get out of here? The city is fallen. Prince is lost. Prince Li Cha? Are you a prisoner here as well?
I am here, but not as a prisoner. I've come with a message. As your future king, I have not lost hope. The time is coming when you will be free again. I will not fail you.
We want to believe, but how can this be possible?
The Clone Wars covers several years of in-universe time for the Star Wars franchise. But obviously, the Star Wars galaxy is much more all-encompassing than, say, for example, the galaxy in Star Trek. In Star Trek, we have the galaxy divided into quadrants. But for the most part, it takes place in some very small sectors of space. Star Wars takes place literally across the whole galaxy. And many planets in Star Wars have been established with years, if not decades, of lore. For example, the planet of Ryloth, which is the home world of the Twi'lek race, or Onderon, or Mandalore, or Mon Cala, which is the home planet of both the Mon Calamari and the Quarren. Rhodia, the home of the Rhodians, and several others. As a result, the Clone Wars visits a lot of these planets, and for some of them, we only get a story arc that might encompass 3, maybe 4 episodes, detailing the battles on that planet. But for others, we might get several episodes sporadically placed across the entire series, showing the battles there, such as the planet of Christophsis, which appears in the original Clone Wars film, and is then returned to several times, or the planet of Dathomir, the homeworld of Mother Talzin and the Night Sisters, which again reappears multiple times. It is in several of these story arcs where we get some of the more interesting war stories in this, where we see the people on these planets fighting back. This comes first of all with the introduction of Cham Syndulla, who is a Twi'lek, leading a rebellion against the separatist occupation of his world. He is a political rival to Senator Orn-Free Tar, who is the representative of his planet in the Senate, a rather obese Twi'lek. Meanwhile, Syndulla and a lot of his allies are living kind of hand-to-mouth. They get the help from Mace Windu, Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and others to kind of help liberate their worlds. But it's quite an intense battle and involves a little bit of political wrangling as Orn-Free Tar and Syndulla try and put aside their differences and work for the betterment of their people, despite their obvious disagreements. Onderon is a planet that gets some significant development. As I said, we were first introduced to Mina and Lux Bonteri in a previous episode. Onderon is a planet that is declared for the Separatists, with Mina Bonteri representing them, and Dooku has her eliminated. This then leads Lux Bonteri to try and form a resistance against the Separatist army that is placed there, the king who has control of the planet. And this is where we get the introduction of Steela and Saw Gerrera, two brother and sister duo who help found the rebellion on this planet. And Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka come to train them, but along with Rex. But they do say, we can't fight your war for you. If the Republic is shown to be, if the Republic and the Jedi are shown to be backing this resistance, then it will create a new front in the war. But if it's a rebellion against the Separatists from the people of the planet, it keeps the Republic out of the fighting, keeps it free from reprisals, which in itself is a political move and quite a daring one, and one that doesn't sit well with Saw Gerrera. Saw Gerrera is the character who goes on to be played by Forrest Whitaker in Star Wars Rogue One. He reappears throughout several projects after the Clone Wars, including Star Wars Rebels as well, and I believe in the Bad Batch. Goes on to be one of the founding members of the Rebel Alliance. Sorry, excuse my phone there. The Mon Cala arc is the episode I used the quote for. The Mon Cala arc is actually one of my favourites in terms of how interconnected it makes the Star Wars universe feel. Mon Cala, the king, has been killed, and his son, Prince Lee Char, who is very young, has sort of been thrust into the spotlight. And as I said, there are two sentient races on this planet, the squid-like Quarren and the fish-like Mon Calamari. The Mon Calamari are Admiral Akbar's people, and in fact Akbar himself does appear in this story arc as a captain of the standing army of Mon Cala. There is a Quarren senator who is part of the separatist armies in episode 2 and episode 3. He doesn't appear in this story arc. There was a plan to return to Mon Cala in a later series, but obviously those episodes went undeveloped when the series was cancelled. The Padme and Anakin have come to sort of oversee the power struggle regarding Lee Char's ascension to the throne, as well as a shark-like observer who has been brought in by the Quarren from the separatist armies by the name of Riff Tamson. We later learn that obviously Tamson is the one responsible for murdering Lee Char's father, the king, and creating this whole situation in the first place, all in a separatist power play to take the planet. Tamson is quite terrifying and completely at his element in the underwater environment, whereas obviously the Jedi aren't. Anakin and Ahsoka are very underprepared. Kit Fisto is much more at home in the seas, but Anakin, Padme, and Ahsoka are not. But as part of this story arc, we see this quite brutal battle in the main city between the Quarren army and the Mon Calamari. A lot of people end up dead, and we see Riff Tamson literally like eating people, swimming through them and tearing them to shreds in the same way that a shark would, which is it's good stuff for a kid's show. The Jedi realise that they have to send help after they're contacted by Kit Fisto, and they have no clones available. So they realise they need a standing arm, a water planet that has a standing army. And they choose to use the Gungans. And so Jar Jar Binks leads a Gungan army to come to the rescue of the Mon Calamari people. And yeah, it's one of my favourite story arcs, just weaving everything together, and the mix of characters it includes, between Kit Fisto, Anakin, Ahsoka, Padme, Jar Jar, and Akbar. It's very well done, and I wish we'd got more exploration of Mon Cala in later seasons, and yeah, it's kind of a shame that we didn't. We get one of the other planets where we get to see it several times is Toydaria. In fact, like the first main episode that I mentioned, Ambush, both the Separatists and Yoda are trying to court King Katunko of Toydaria. Toydaria is the homeworld of Watto's people from episode 1. He sets a challenge between Asajj Ventress and Yoda, and Yoda wins because Asajj Ventress acts dishonorably. And so, he pledges loyalty to the Republic. Which, of course, this early victory for the Republic, Dooku is very tempted to undermine throughout the entire series. So when he takes on Savage Opress as his new apprentice, he sends Savage to capture Katunko, but Savage kills him. So just seeing elements like that come back and return throughout the series is great stuff. It's not uncommon that we'll hear battles reoccurring on on planets that we've seen explored before. As the series go on, we see people enslaved, we see heroes killed, not just local heroes on the planets, but also also Jedi killed saving these planets or saving these people. The political machinations from planets that try to stay safe, try to stay out of the fighting. We get a feeling by the end of the show that the Jedi are desperate for the war to end because it's not protecting the people. And I think a lot of that does help drive a lot of episode 3. The Jedi are feeling worn down by the Clone Wars. And this is becoming apparent by the time we get to episode 3, I think. So it's a great addition for the Clone Wars series to take the time to explore it, to explore these planets. And, and plus they're all fantastic visually. There are some amazing designs here at play. Loads of great moments, very visual landscapes, very Star Wars. It's fantastic. And a lot of this is benefited by the animation medium. Although I did notice there is a recurring trend of having, the set piece for this particular planet always taking place on a plateau. Some large plateau where the clone gunships will fly down and land. I don't know if that's a restriction of the animation or just a Star Wars visual that the producers seem to quite like. One of the more interesting planets that works as a battlefield is Geonosis, which is where the first battle of the Clone Wars takes place at the end of episode 2, which actually has like zombie brain worms. So you end up with zombie bugs fighting the clones. That's a very interesting story arc, a lot of fun. Also has some great moments between Ahsoka and Barriss, which makes Barriss's betrayal in season 5 much more interesting. So yeah, I'd recommend that arc as well. But pretty much any arc that involves a focus on a particular planet, you're usually going to get some good development of the people on that planet, or an engaging story as to why this planet is important for the overall war effort.
Why, General? Why kill your own men?
Because I can. Because you fell for it. Because you're inferior.
But you're a Jedi. How could you?
A Jedi. I am no longer naive enough to be a Jedi. A new power is rising. I've foreseen it. The Jedi are going to lose this war, and the Republic will be ripped apart from the inside. In its place is going to rise a new order, and I will rule as part of it.
You're a separatist.
I serve no one side, only my own. And soon, my new master.
You're an agent of Dooku.
Not yet, but when I get out of here, I will be. After I've succeeded in driving the Republic from Umbara, the Count will reward my actions and make me his new apprentice.
How did you do this? You had my trust, my loyalty. I followed all of your orders, and you made me kill my brothers.
That's because you were the biggest fool of them all, Doctor. I counted on blind loyalty like yours to make my plan succeed.
That will never happen. You're a traitor, General, and you will be dealt with as one.
One of the major recurring themes of the Clone Wars series is, especially in its later seasons, is the effect that the Clone Wars are having upon the Jedi. Now, the Jedi Order, as originally envisioned by George Lucas, the Jedi are a group of essentially warrior monks. They are a combination almost of a Shaolin and a samurai, exploring the peaceful nature and the, what you can do for yourself to better yourself and what you can do for others of a Shaolin. And being able to resort to incredible violence if necessary, but never pursuing it as a first course. They have a code of honor. Things matter to them. In the Clone Wars, however, the Jedi have been turned into soldiers. Jedi Masters and Jedi Knights are generals. Jedi Padawans are commanders, as pointed out quite early on in the series when Commander Tano, Ahsoka, makes a comment to Rex that technically, because he's a captain, she outranks him. It's... The Jedi are now responsible, as part of the Grand Army of the Republic, for making and pursuing a war. And that has an effect upon them. The Separatists as well, and the Separatists are more sympathetic as well in Clone Wars than perhaps they were in Episode 2 and 3. When they're introduced in Episode 2, it's Dooku leading the Trade Federation, the Techno Union, the Banking Clan, the Corporate Guild. It's a group of corporations and money makers trying to break away from the government. These aren't people that are sympathetic. Clone Wars makes them sympathetic. Clone Wars introduces, people like I've already mentioned, like Mina Monteri, separatist political leaders who aren't, corporate figureheads. And their inclusion makes the separatists more sympathetic and makes the Jedi able, in some cases, to sympathize with their position, as seen with Ahsoka and Lux. Even with the senators like Padme are able to understand entirely where the separatists are coming from in some respects and want to try and find a common ground and pursue peace. There's also other senators that want to keep their systems out of the war as best they can. People like Satine, who want to keep their worlds out of the fighting as best as they can. But the Jedi are now turned from peacekeepers. They're not able to pursue this peace. They are now soldiers. They are generals. They are responsible for pursuing this war. I apologise for the noise in the background. It is too hot here in the UK right now to have my windows closed and prevent noise. And obviously them being soldiers has an effect upon them. The most prominent examples are with two major characters, one of which I've already discussed, which is Barriss Offee, and how she causes the bombing in the Jedi Temple, how she is realizing, she has a verbal battle with Anakin as they fight, where she says that the Jedi are wrong, the war is wrong. But one of the more prominent examples of a fallen Jedi comes in Season 4, and that is Pong Krell. Pong Krell, I've forgotten the name of his race. For anyone who's seen Episode 2, the cook, Dexter, with the 4 arms, that Obi-Wan goes to see on Coruscant, he's one of that race. And he is a Jedi general who takes control of the 501st in a very dangerous battlefield of Umbara. And Rex and Fives and several of the other members of the 501st really start to chafe under his leadership. Whereas some of the other clones, such as Dogma, see that he is their general and offer him blind loyalty. And Krell manipulates a lot of clones into fighting and killing each other. He manipulates them into almost suicidal engagements where they take heavy losses. And we learn that it is because Krell has fallen to the dark side as a result of pursuing this war, pursuing the war against the Separatists. And in fact, the Krell story arc is one of the best examples of the storytelling that the Clone Wars has to offer. In fact, I've used 2 quotes from that story arc in this episode alone. The conversation that I had earlier between Rex and Fives and the one I've just used. Krell is fantastic and a very terrifying villain. In just his sheer callous nature. And how you can sense there's something off about him. But also this is a Jedi known for not taking the lives of his clones seriously. You know, he is more ruthless in his approach anyway. And how that has led him to this darker path. We see this happen with other Jedi as well. You know, we see the way that the Jedi Council turns on Ahsoka when the evidence points towards her for the conspiracy, and how willing they are to exile her, and how that shows that they're being used. You know, how... as Ahsoka learns from the Martez sisters, how the Jedi that met with them after their parents killed offered such a hollow answer to them, that the Force will be with them, and how those words ring hollow to the people in this galaxy that are losing so much due to this war. And then, of course, as the series progresses into season 5 and 6, the you know, they learn how Dooku manipulated the war, and they decide to do something about it. They decide to plot his assassination using Quinlan Vos. This is the novel Dark Disciple, based on the 2 unproduced story arcs. And they suggest sending Quinlan Vos and getting him to, you know, form a camaraderie with Asajj Ventress, who has long been out from under Dooku's control, but is still definitely not on the side of the Angels. You know, she is not on the light side of the Force by any means. You know, she's a bounty hunter at this point. But the Jedi plot Dooku's assassination and send Quinlan to team with Asajj Ventress to carry it out. And in doing so, this leads Quinlan down a very dark path. He gets captured and manipulated by Dooku, and, you know, almost turned to the dark side himself when he learns of the death of his master, and how Dooku had Asajj Ventress kill him. Sorry, kill his master Thom. It's very interesting seeing the lengths that the Jedi will start to go to by the end of this series, by the end of this Clone Wars project. And in fact, Yoda's response to this is very interesting. Yoda gets an arc, and it's about 3-4 episodes towards the end of season 6, where he leaves the Jedi Temple in search sort of a quest for answers, and he ends up going to the Sith homeworld before finally arriving on Dagobah, where he ends up in the original trilogy and at the end of episode 3. And he is greeted by the Force ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn. Now, Qui-Gon at this point can't manifest himself as a Force ghost, but he is able to talk to Yoda. So we get Liam Neeson's amazing voice coming back as Qui-Gon and interacting with Yoda, where Yoda sees the future. Yoda sees everything that is going to happen. Not in detail, but we see Order 66. We see Darth Vader through Yoda's vision. And this obviously starts Yoda on his path that is then explored throughout episode 3 and into the original trilogy, where the Jedi have to change. Things have to be different. And yes, it's backwards explanation. It's retroactive continuity. It's a retcon by saying that this is how this happened. But the revelation that Yoda makes in episode 3 to Obi-Wan, that he's been discussing things with Qui-Gon, comes out of nowhere without this episode, without this story arc. And so that makes one of the more jarring "whoa" moments in episode 3 make sense. And I do enjoy that.
You have no business left with the Pikes Tyrannus.
Tyrannus? You are the man called Tyrannus?
I told you everything you needed to know on Geonosis all those years ago, Kenobi. You should have joined me. Sifo Dyas understood. He saw the future. That is why he helped me.
You lie.
Of course, the central villain of, essentially of the entire Star Wars saga at this point is Darth Sidious. And episode 3, I think, is the film that best shows that. Darth Sidious takes a relatively... Well, he's relatively sidelined throughout the Clone Wars, because in a similar way to the prequels, he's separated into his dual personas, the public face of Chancellor Palpatine and the hidden face of Darth Sidious. Now, Darth Sidious does get a lot more to do as a Sith Lord, and obviously you come into the Clone Wars knowing that Sidious is Palpatine, in a similar way to how a lot of us went into the prequels. But his manipulations are forefront of a lot of this. And there, like as I said earlier, there are a couple of scenes where the veneer does slip, where we see him with his attendant Mas Amida, where he talks about, removing Padme as an obstacle. How he tries to manipulate planets and events using the people at his command. Causing the elimination of Mina Bonteri, causing reprisals against whole worlds on the part of the separatist armies. We see his control of Dooku. Dooku is nothing more than Sidious's puppet. And, this is something that's exemplified by episode 3. And we realise, in the final battle before, as Palpatine orders Anakin to kill Dooku, just how we see that look on Count Dooku's face, performed excellently by Christopher Lee. That moment of realization when he realizes just how much he has been played, and it is fantastic. I really like that scene. That is exemplified in this. Dooku is nothing more than Sidious's right hand. He's a puppet. He has no power of his own. Every decision he makes comes from Palpatine. We see this when he is ordered by Palpatine to cut Asajj Ventress loose, and how that leads him to going back to Mother Talzin to get Savage Opress, and how Asajj and Savage's manipulations and their attack on Dooku then lead to Sidious deciding to remove Mother Talzin and the Night Sisters, leading to a massacre on Dathomir, where all of the Night Sisters are eliminated except for Asajj Ventress, who's able to escape, and Talzin herself, although she is then forced to basically give up her physical form to restore Darth Maul. And then in the comic series, Son of Dathomir is finally destroyed trying to save Darth Maul from Sidious. Sidious gradually takes down all threats to his power throughout this series. Mother Talzin is a threat. He eliminates her. The Jedi are a threat. He weakens them. He even, towards the final acts, final arcs of this series, we see that the military presence is taking greater control of the Grand Army, removing power from the Jedi. As we see characters like Tarkin come into the forefront. Admiral Tarkin is obviously quite trusted by Palpatine based on the scenes that we get between them. And then, of course, Tarkin himself reappears in episode 3, where he's been put in charge of the Death Star project by Darth Vader and Palpatine as well. Sidious is either removing any threats to his power or making efforts to deal with them. And while also taking more and more power as the Chancellor, which, as I said when we're talking about the political machinations, is an ongoing part of this whole story. Taking control of the banks, taking emergency security powers. It's so clever. And yes, like I said, a lot of it is retcon. It is stuff added in to make the film better. But it does make that film better. You watch episode 3. Episode 3, for me, is the best look at Sidious. Sidious is essentially the main villain of the Star Wars saga. I'm not very happy about the whole idea of bringing him back in Rise of Skywalker. I think that was a travesty that makes the original film trilogies worse. Both the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, as well as the sequel trilogy. It makes the whole series worse. But I will probably do a podcast on that one day. But what it does do in episode 3 is we for the first real time, I mean, we've had elements of it. You have elements of it in episode 1, where he manipulates Padme into removing Valorum as High Chancellor. We see elements of it in episode 2, you know, where he drops the hint that then leads to Jar Jar calling for the army. You know, it's very clever. He's a very, very clever man. But episode 3 is, for me, the high point of all of this. As we see him really try to seize power from, you know, and control over Anakin. And how this culminates in his reveal as the Emperor. And it's very well done, and I think this whole series shows just how much control Sidious and Palpatine already have. You know, we see him fight Darth Maul when Darth Maul gains power on Mandalore and kills Savage Opress. We see him order Grievous and Dooku to take down Talzin. You know, he gradually eliminates all of his enemies, all of the threats to his power, so that when he takes over as Emperor, he will be as unopposed as possible. And I think it's done so well. And it was already, for me, one of the strongest points of episode 3. So it's one of the more subtle elements in the Clone Wars. But that background of it in the Clone Wars definitely makes it far superior. Plus, of course, there's the amazing reveal to the Jedi when they learn about Dooku being Tyrannus, and how, you know, the whole Clone Wars themselves, the formation of the Grand Army, everything, how it all ties back to Dooku and by extension Sidious. And how they realise that this Sith Lord, this elusive Sith Lord that they've been hunting, has been behind everything from the very beginning. And that's a very, very good late-game reveal in the Clone Wars. It doesn't come until Season 6, but when it comes, oh, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
I just need you to listen to me. Please. I'm not really sure we have any other choice.
I was framed because I know the truth. The truth about a plot. A massive deception. By who? Well, there's a sinister plot in the works against the Jedi. I have proof of it. I can prove that everything that I know is true beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Show me the evidence.
The evidence is in here. It's in here. It's in all of us. Every clone. What is it?
Organic chips built into our genetic code to make us do whatever someone wants.
Even kill the Jedi. It's all in here.
Let's just get you some help first. Then we can review everything. We'll be okay first. We'll sort this out.
You don't believe me!
Order 66 is another high point of episode 3. It's one of the most powerful sequences in the whole film, if not in the entire Star Wars saga. I think it is so well done. And I think the whole story of Order 66 is one of the reasons why I keep coming back to episode 3 as my favourite. And it's clearly something that Dave Filoni is a fan of, how many times he's revisited the tragedy of that moment in shows such as The Mandalorian, The Bad Batch, even Kenobi. You know, this is... Order 66 is a rich well to tap on. You know, so many things have gone back to it. You know, Fallen Jedi, the video game, you know, its opening takes place around the same time as Order 66. It's that powerful and that influential a moment. as a result of being a surprise reveal in episode 3, it doesn't feature much of the Clone Wars. It only features in 2 major story arcs. The final story arc of the entire show, where in the last 2 episodes, Rex and the other members of the 501st that are assigned to Ahsoka fall victim to the order of Order 66 and turn on Ahsoka and Darth Maul, which in itself is brilliant and heart-wrenching at times, seeing Rex level his guns at Ahsoka, seeing Rex, once he's saved by Ahsoka and freed of the influence of the control chip, having to turn on his brothers, having to turn on clones that we've come to love, such as Jesse, and seeing them be fought off and die as a result of Order 66. But the main arc that deals with Order 66 comes earlier, and it involves Fives and Tup. Tup is another clone member of the 501st that we've seen a few times. During a battle in an orbital space station, I believe, a very large one, where Anakin and the 501st are supporting the 2 Jedi Knights, Tipley and Tiplar, twins. In the middle of the battle, Tup shoots dead one of the Jedi twins. I believe it's Tipley, might be Tiplar, can't remember. Shoots her dead. And then, after being restrained by his fellow clones, is studied and examined, and we reveal that, well, Tup is raving, repeating the phrase, "Good soldiers follow orders," over and over again in a manic way, before saying, "Kill the Jedi," and lunging at the other sister as well as Anakin. Fives and the others try to investigate. They take Tup to Kamino, where he is examined by a Kaminoan doctor, who contacts Dooku, who we now know by this point in the series is the, well, as we knew from episode 2, is the person responsible for organising the clones. I think the actual reveal of Dooku as Tyrannus comes a bit later on. And Tup is killed by the Kaminoan doctor because he's lost control. We find out that there is organic control chips implanted in the clones as part of their genetic tinkering to turn them into an army. I apologise for my phone going off then when I was getting quite serious. Fives won't accept Tup's death and investigates and learns about these organic control chips. Tup had a fault with his, almost like a tumour, a cancer. And the Kaminoans try to portray that as why Tup malfunctioned in the way he did. Such a callous way of putting it. Fives investigates and with the help of a medical droid has his own control chip removed forcibly. And he is absolutely fine. And with both control chips in hand, he tries to get the evidence to Rex and Anakin. And we are rooting for him. We know Fives won't be successful. If you've seen episode 3, you know he won't be successful. But you are rooting for him every step of the way. But Palpatine learns about it from Dooku, as Sidious. I think one of the only times in the series where Palpatine is acknowledged as Darth Sidious. And Palpatine sends the Council Guard, led by Fox, to eliminate Fives. Not to bring him in, to eliminate him. And that's exactly what happens. Fives was on the cusp of averting the entire tragedy of Order 66. But Palpatine, Darth Sidious, prevented it. And the Jedi remain none the wiser. We later learn in the final episodes that Rex questioned what had happened to Fives and Tup, and had heard enough from Fives that he was suspicious and put it into an official report. And it's using that official report and the acknowledgement of what happened to Fives that Ahsoka is able to give Rex his own mind back in the final arc. And that's brilliant. It's lovely to see, and it's nice to see Rex not be responsible for killing a Jedi after having grown to like him so much. Several of the Jedi even get warnings in the Force about Order 66, about everything that will happen. As I said earlier, most obviously Yoda. But it does nothing. These warnings are misinterpreted by the people who see them. And Order 66 happens. And as I said, it's one of my favourite moments in the entire saga, and I think it's one of the best moments in the entire saga. And yeah, I remember the first time I saw it in the cinema. I remember every time I've seen it since. It is one of those scenes from pop culture that is just etched in my brain from the first time I saw it, and the emotions, the raw emotion that I felt watching that scene for the first time. And so even though I know Clone Wars couldn't do anything to change Order 66, seeing Fives' quest to almost unravel it, and how what Fives did helps Ahsoka to save Rex, is great. And I really enjoy it. And I really like that the final few episodes take place at the same time as Order 66, so that they can confront that aspect of the storyline. So yeah, I'm glad Order 66 is here and is represented in the Clone Wars as well. And I think the way they did it was very, very well done.
I have a gift for you. I've had enough of your trickery. But you'll like this one, I promise. What if I could show you the future? Stop. Know yourself. Know what you will become. I will not look. Force is strong. I will do such terrible things.
And finally, we come to the most integral part of both Episode 3 and the Clone Wars, which is Anakin Skywalker. The tragedy of Anakin and his fall, knowing that no matter what else will happen, he is destined to fall, to become Darth Vader, to become one of the greatest evils that the galaxy has ever known, is something that underlines a lot of the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars takes Anakin from Episode 2 being, a Jedi Padawan who is prone to anger, struggling with attachment, who massacred, touched the dark side by massacring a whole family of Tusken Raiders, a whole family of Sand People, because they killed his mother. He's turned from that into a warrior in very short order. He has to fight in the Clone Wars, and, as a newly minted Jedi Knight underneath Obi-Wan Kenobi, he fights on the forefront of the Clone Wars, and he is shown to be, a brave and cunning warrior. Everything that we get told about Anakin in the Clone Wars from Obi-Wan in Star Wars A New Hope, we see built up as Anakin in the Clone Wars. We see him being Obi-Wan's friend. We see him being a warrior. We see him being, a brave Jedi Knight. But of course, Episode 3, as well as exploring Anakin's fall, also explores the whole legend of the Chosen One, where the Jedi actually start to realise in Episode 3 that maybe they misunderstood the prophecy of the Chosen One, and that's part of what leads to their downfall and leads to Anakin's fall. His manipulation by Sidious into becoming Darth Vader. And this is even hinted at a couple of times throughout the Clone Wars. Obviously, there was the story arc I mentioned earlier with Yoda, where he sees his own vision of the future. But perhaps one of the most important ones is a story arc in Season 3 called the Mortis arc. The Jedi pick up an ancient distress signal, like 2,000 years old ancient. And they fly out to the area of space where they picked it up. Anakin, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka in a shuttle head towards the signal and end up finding themselves on a planet called Mortis, separated from the clones who came with them. Mortis is a brilliantly designed, almost living world that reacts to the changes of the people on it. And it is inhabited by 3 powerful beings. These beings are the Father, the Son, and the Daughter. Now, these 3 beings, the Ones as they are called, are interpreted by many, many people to represent aspects of the Force. And I should mention that this particular arc, the Mortis arc, was one that was actually originated by George Lucas. This was a story arc that George Lucas wanted to tell. This wasn't a case of Dave Filoni coming to him with an idea. This was George Lucas coming to Filoni with an idea. So this is clearly an important part of the story. The Father has summoned Anakin here, and by extension Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, because he knows that Anakin is the Chosen One, and that Mortis, the planet of Mortis, is almost like a nexus for the cosmic force. And so Anakin will need to bring balance to his children, the son and the daughter. The daughter is shown as somewhat passive to her father's wishes, trying to find balance and the health of things. The son is shown as being quite reckless and almost arrogant. And you can read them as avatars of the light and dark side. But one theory I quite like is that they don't represent the aspects of the light and dark side themselves, but rather the aspects of different Force users, with the father representing the will of the Force itself. And the daughter represents the people who would try and work in harmony with the Force to protect it. Not just the Jedi, but many other characters as well, who would try and, work within the Force. And work with it rather than using it. Whereas the son seems to embody not just the Sith, but anyone who would sort of use the Force to their own ends. And throughout this story arc, the son in rebellion against the daughter, in rebellion against his father, tries to lash out and kill him. But in doing so, this kills his sister, the daughter. And in killing her, the planet takes a turn for the worse. The son then shows Anakin a vision of the future, a vision of exactly what he will become as Darth Vader. It was the little excerpt I played a minute ago. And you hear in that quotes from episode 3, direct quotes being shown to Anakin, as he is shown exactly what will happen to him, exactly what he will do. And the son uses that to almost make Anakin fall to the dark side. And it is only through the strength of Anakin's bonds with Ahsoka and Obi-Wan that he is able to, come out from under the son's control. The Mortis arc is fantastic. I'm not doing it justice at all. It's one of the much more interesting, much more cerebral arcs of Star Wars. One of the more cerebral stories in Star Wars as a whole, telling some very interesting ideas on what the Force is, which is something that George Lucas has always hinted at but never really elaborated upon. And the idea of exactly what Anakin's role is going to be in bringing balance to the Force seems to be something quite discussed in this arc. For example, this is the first reappearance of Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon. And he's actually able to physically manifest and appear and talk to Obi-Wan. Ahsoka is also given a vision of her future. It's very, very interesting and lays a lot of the groundwork down. And one particular line from it got latched onto when Season 7 came out, which was Obi-Wan's line to Ahsoka and Anakin quite early on, where, as long as the three of us stick together, we'll be perfectly safe. Or we'll be fine, something like that. As long as the three of us are together. And obviously, as the series goes on, and as episode 3 goes on, we see that the three of them are separated, and it becomes their downfall. There's more to the Mortis arc that explores the tragedy of Anakin. We still see that Anakin, despite being a hero and being an instrumental leader in the Clone Wars, he's still prone to his fits of anger. His reactions, when he learns about the slavers who have taken a whole planet's population hostage, with his own experiences growing up as a slave, his visceral reaction to that is incredibly interesting, and shows that Anakin still has darkness in him. in fact, if anything, the son might have brought it closer to the forefront, because a lot of Anakin's major moments of darkness come after the Mortis arc. Anakin has now touched the dark side. And as a result, his downfall may be even more inevitable now. We see... There's one particular story arc where Obi-Wan has to fake his death to go undercover and infiltrate a group of bounty hunters. And to fake his death and to really sell the idea that Obi-Wan is dead, they don't tell Anakin. And Anakin's reaction when he hunts for the Jedi who supposedly killed Obi-Wan, he is incensed. He is a true man on a mission, to the point it even scares Ahsoka, who is following with him. It's very, very well done. And I do think it's helped by Matt Lanter doing a brilliant job as Anakin. And I think Hayden Christensen in episode 3 in some ways is almost a bit of a step down from how strong and capable Anakin is presented in the Clone Wars. But as I said, the Clone Wars do kind of account for that as well. We see that Anakin is strong because of the people around him. His relationships with Rex, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, Padme. And throughout the final phases of the Clone Wars, he loses all of them. Not just across the Clone Wars itself, but going into episode 3 as well. He loses Ahsoka when she leaves the Jedi Order after her trial, and that has a pronounced effect upon him. It irreparably damages their own bond and relationship. Even when she returns in episode 7, he wants things to be exactly as they were, and she makes it clear that they won't be. And it's almost quite heartbreaking to see, especially knowing what comes next. Rex leaves him to join up with Ahsoka to give her aid in her mission. And then following that through into episode 3, where Padme and Obi-Wan are separated from him as well. I like it. I think it's very well done, and I think the fall of Anakin is something that was inevitable. It was inevitable when episode 3 was originally released. It's inevitable when Clone Wars started being made. And I think a good groundwork is laid to explain it across the film and the series. And I think it's one of the most important parts of episode 3. And the use of it, the whole idea of what the Chosen One is, what Anakin's destiny is, and how well suited he might be for that destiny, is teased, throughout the Clone Wars. And then, despite evolving as a hero, Anakin is still the same character we come to know across episode 1 and episode 2. He may be a warrior, but at times he is still a very scared and frightened child who is angered by suffering. And the Clone Wars had no end of suffering.
1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic, before the Dark Times, before the Empire. A young Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine until he turned to evil, helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
Lord Vader. Yes, Master. Right.
I couldn't not include that little section there. That, if for anyone who wasn't aware, was the soundtrack for the original Episode 3 teaser trailer, which if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend. Like I said, I watched it on repeat for weeks leading up to the release of Episode 3. I loved that trailer. How it combines all the elements of all the different films to tease what was at the time the culmination of the saga. I think I've covered pretty much everything I do want to talk about the Clone Wars now. I think I've made my point that the Clone Wars enhances not just the prequels, but makes Episode 3 a better film. And I've barely even talked about some of the other storylines in the show. For example, there are various bounty hunter storylines with their own recurring characters, which are incredible. There's a whole story where Ahsoka goes with some Jedi younglings to make their own lightsabers. There's a story where she encounters Chewbacca and he saves her life. There's, and all these introductions of characters, old and new, throughout the saga. Not just the prequel characters that we see get developed, but also characters who would logically have been around in this time, like Tarkin and Akbar and Chewbacca, and getting more of them. It's great to see. I really, really enjoy the Clone Wars. And as I said, Episode 3 is my favourite Star Wars film. I think it's not the best. I don't think it is the best. As much as the argument of this is why this makes Episode 3 the best Star Wars film, I think if you were to look at a technical metric, Episode 3 isn't the best Star Wars film. I think in terms of its storytelling, it's one of the best. And its visuals are incredible as well. I know there's a lot of people who might complain and say, oh, but there's too much CGI, oh, but it does this to the lore and so on. Don't care. Canon should always be a guideline. It should never get in the way of telling a good story. If it does, you can find a way to retcon it, or people can find a way to headcanon it in. People have been doing that with comics for years. So I don't believe that canon is an excuse. And, yes, there is a lot of CGI in Episode 3. There wasn't all of the prequels. However, Episode 3 had more sets built for it than for the entire original trilogy, which is one of my favourite little facts. And it's just a great addition. A lot of those things that the characters are interacting with on screen, yeah, they're real. Yeah, I really like Episode 3, and I really like the Clone Wars. And I haven't even touched how elements of the Clone Wars. Like I said, this was the only thing, apart from those original 6 films, that Disney kept as canon when they took over. And they've now used the Clone Wars and the elements introduced in it to build so many of their other series, or to reoccur in so many of their other series. Obviously, Star Wars Rebels, the first cartoon series that they did, went into production very soon after Disney took over, which again featured Dave Filoni at the helm. The main character, one of the main characters, Hera Syndulla, she is a relative of Cham Syndulla from the Ryloth mission. I think Saw Gerrera also appears in it as well, and Ahsoka reappears now as a Grey Jedi, and she has an encounter with Anakin on Mortis as well, not just anywhere, on Mortis. Or Mortis plays an element in the finale, at least. There's the Bad Batch, which is the most obvious successor to the Clone Wars. Season 1 came out, was it last year, earlier this year? I haven't got around to watching it. I really do want to. And Bad Batch Season 2 is coming out next year, and looks like a lot of fun. In fact, one of the Jedi younglings is reappearing in Bad Batch Season 2 by the look of it, judging by his appearance in the trailer. And again, based on the appearances in the trailer, it looks like Bad Batch Season 2 will be taking more of the kind of anthology approach that Star Wars took, where each episode might not necessarily focus on the Bad Batch themselves, or at least will introduce other characters around them. So that could be a lot of fun. Kenobi even fought Maul in Rebels. Darth Maul reappeared in Rebels. Obviously, he had the post-credit scene in Solo as well, which came out after his appearance in Rebels. The appearance in Rebels has him in a final fight with Obi-Wan Kenobi in the sands of Tatooine, where Maul is killed. And then, of course, there's how a lot of this stuff has reappeared in, the Mandalorian era series. Like I said earlier, Ahsoka's getting her own series. She reappeared in The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, but also the character of Cad Bane reappeared in the Book of Boba Fett as well. Cad Bane being one of the bounty hunters that I mentioned and I've barely talked about. There's numerous other characters as well. There's the character of Hondo Ohnaka, who is a smuggler, rebel, rogue type that encounters Obi-Wan and Anakin several times. He reappears in Rebels, I believe. I think there's a character who reappears again, I believe, in Rebels. It might even be somewhere else. Who is a child of Dathomir, like one of the last surviving Night Sisters. She was a child during the massacre. So much of this has come back in some way or another. That I think you can't write the Clone Wars off. If you care about Star Wars, I think you owe it to yourself to watch the Clone Wars. Even if you only watch certain episodes, but at least to watch a good chunk of it. Because there is some great stuff in here, and it's stuff that I think, because of how we undervalue animation in the West, was written off as kids' fare for the longest time, when it's the best example you can think of all ages content. I mean, Star Wars is for kids. Like, if you really look at it, Star Wars is for kids. It's not for adults, but it's for families. It's for all ages. Star Wars is designed for children. It's designed to make money by selling merchandise, selling toys. That's one of the main reasons Disney bought it. In the same way that they bought Marvel, because they wanted toy lines that they could sell to boys. Because Disney had the very successful Disney Princess line, which covers pretty much everything girls might be interested in. So they wanted Star Wars and Marvel to sell to boys. Disney is a money-making machine for children. Star Wars is a money-making machine aimed at children. You know, despite how much some of the fandom take it so seriously, like way too seriously, Star Wars is designed for kids. So if you can't write off Clone Wars or Rebels or The Bad Batch and say they're for kids and then watch the films, that seems like such a contradiction to me. You know, either you're interested in Star Wars or you aren't. And the Clone Wars is peak Star Wars. And not only is it incredible in and by itself, it makes Episode 3 the best Star Wars film. Right. Thanks for sticking with me through all that. That is the conclusion, not just to this episode, but also to Season 3. I'm hoping to be back next week with the start of Season 4. I have 2 episodes I'm planning to launch Season 4 with. One is commenting on all of the news and announcements we got from Marvel not very long ago, regarding their upcoming slate for Phase 5 and Phase 6. But I'm also looking to comment on the Warner Brothers DC merger in less cheerful news, and specifically look at what it means for the future of DC Comics, with their films and shows, a number of them already being cancelled and several others on the chopping block by the look of it. So that's what I'm planning to do. Following that, I have an episode planned on the Orville, which is reaching its 5th anniversary this year. So I thought it was a perfect time to take a look at that. If you're very, very lucky, I may have all 3 of them ready at once. Who knows? But yes, that is my long-awaited Star Wars episode. As this grew into something so big, I decided it had to be the end of the season. And I'm glad for everyone who's been patient for it, and I'm glad that you've stayed and listened to it. Sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, as always, thank you so much for listening and continuing to support this podcast. Every single one of you who listens to this, every time I see a play or on either any of the streaming apps or on YouTube, it makes my heart happy, and it means so much to me. And this is the sort of thing I would love to be able to put all my time and effort into, rather than like a standard 9 to 5. So every single one of you that continues to support it means the absolute world to me. Look after yourselves until next we meet, my friends. Times are hard. If you're... I live in the UK, so things are very, very hard, and they look like they're all going to get harder before they get better. But let's keep looking after each other and reach out to me. And if you can't reach out to anyone else, you can reach out to me. That's what the Discord that I set up is for. I want people to come together and build a community where we can share memes and art and jokes and all these other things to keep ourselves mentally well. So yeah, until next time, everyone, take care of yourselves.
Thank you, my friends, for once again joining me on Garhdo Goes Geek. Your continued support for this podcast means the absolute world to me, and I am grateful for every single one of you who stays and listens to one of my episodes. It means the absolute world. Now, if you would like to engage more with me or the podcast, We have a Discord community, small but growing, and we now have commissions open on Ko-Fi. So if there's a topic you would like to see me cover, you can pay me to cover it. All funds will be used for legal purchase of the relevant items where I do not have them. Have a look on the link tree for more information. Until next time, look after yourselves.